Chapter 381. Master, the letter has been sent. It should be delivered in a quarter of an hour. Noise trotted over and reported. Dudian nodded. Have you settled the civilians that you hired? I've already hired them. They're waiting for you at the departure point. Noise lowered his head. Dean nodded slightly as he looked at the drizzle outside. His eyes narrowed. The rain seemed to last longer than the past. After a moment, Reed led a heavily armed team to the front of the castle. Civilians and several blonde nobles who were gathered outside the castle were surprised as they saw the team. Although they loved Dudian, but they didn't dare to show any disrespect in front of Reed's team. Reed saw Dean waiting in front of the hall. He dismounted and trotted over. Greetings, Master Dean. Dudian nodded. Let's go. Reed's face turned ugly. Master Dean, we just got the news. The Golden Wall has been occupied by the barbarians. General Auburn vowed to fight to the last moment and died in the line of duty. I'm here to tell you to rest at home. The battlefield is too dangerous, so we can only retreat to the second line of defense and fight with the barbarians. Dudian was surprised. The Golden Wall has fallen? Yes. Reed bowed his head. Dean's expression was complicated. He seemed to have made up his mind. He gritted his teeth and said, In that case, I have to come out. Now is the time when we are in need of manpower. Your military headquarters has been fighting in the rain for a long time. I guess many soldiers have fallen ill. Now that you are short of manpower, instead of forcing ordinary people to die on the battlefield, it is better to let someone like me, who has the strength of a knight, go to the battlefield. I dare not say anything else, but I can at least beat dozens of civilians. Reed was startled as he looked at Dudian's determined face. A sense of shame rose in his heart. Master Dean, I don't dare to underestimate your strength. But the battlefield is too dangerous. Please stay at home and rest. Dean looked at him. I'm going to go to war. I've talked to the military about this matter. Do you think it's that easy to change the commitment of the military? Reed's face slightly changed. Master Dean, you misunderstood me. I'm just trying to persuade you. I'm not determined to stop you. I'm just trying to persuade you. You don't need to persuade me. Let's go. The situation is critical. What kind of men are we? Dudian waved his hand and bypassed the burly man's body. He mounted a horse. Let's go. Reed's face turned red as he didn't expect Dudian to be so decisive. He hesitated for a moment and sighed. Master Dean, you can change to my horse. Our military's horses have been trained. Private horses like yours haven't been to the battlefield. I'm afraid that they will be scared if they encounter mutant beasts or barbarians that cross the Golden Wall. All right. Dean agreed to the proposal and simply jumped off the horse. Reed took Dudian outside the castle. He took a horse from the front of the team. Master, this horse is a bit fierce. Be careful. Dudian smiled as he grabbed the horse's rope. The horse was about 3 meters tall and had thick black hair. Its body was covered with steel armor. It was the same type of horse as the hunters. It was the only carnivorous horse. The black horse neighed as it was led by Dudian. It pulled the rope and turned its head to leave. Reed was about to help suppress the horse. Dudian grabbed the rope and sat on the back of the black horse. Hiss! The horse neighed as its front hooves were in the air. Its body was almost upright, as if it wanted to throw Dudian off. Dudian smiled as he raised his hand and pressed the back of the horse's neck. Bang! The black horse's body, which had been standing at an 80-degree angle, suddenly sank slightly. Its hind legs went soft, and it almost knelt down. Its front hooves quickly landed on the ground, and it neighed softly twice, but it didn't move anymore. Reed was surprised as he looked at Dudian. He thought of the information given to him. He turned over and rode on his horse. He looked at Dudian. Master, shall we go? Well. Dean pulled the reins, turned the horse's head, and walked along the river road. The civilians and nobles who had gathered on both sides of the river cheered loudly as they saw Dudian's figure. Dudian was holding a horse's rope in one hand and the helmet in the other. He was smiling as he slowly walked along the riverbank. The people who had gathered on both sides of the river were gradually left behind. Reed and Dudian were riding side by side. There were 20 well-dressed soldiers behind him. Dean couldn't help but look back at the elites who were selected to protect him. From the weapons and decorations they carried, as well as the decorations on their armors, it was easy to identify them. Of course, it also required a certain amount of military knowledge to be able to recognize them easily. Shield swordsmen, archers, knights. Dudian glanced at them. Suddenly, his eyes paused on one of the figures. However, he quickly moved his eyes away. His heart wasn't calm. The person who was dressed like the other shield swordsmen was emitting heat that was much higher than the others. Moreover, through the vision of light X-ray vision, he could see that the frequency of his heart beating in front of his chest was extremely calm, but the blood in his body was twisting vigorously, as if his blood contained extremely strong energy. In addition, the muscles on his body were much more than the others. His neck, waist, face, and other places had extremely dense muscle groups. This wasn't something that could be achieved by ordinary exercise. It was a leap in physical strength. Dudian had seen such a body structure in Sergei, Gwyneth, and Reed. In other words, this ordinary shield swordsman's combat power wasn't inferior to a senior hunter. Hiding a suspected senior hunter in the escort team. Is it to prevent any danger? Dudian slightly frowned as there were some doubts in his heart. There were many possibilities, including that the military had sent this person to assassinate him. However, he quickly overthrew such a possibility. After all, if he was assassinated by the escort team, then the responsibility of the military would be too big. Although he couldn't think of any conclusion, Dudian didn't directly ask Reed, as he didn't want to alert the enemy. He just secretly paid attention to this person and kept a certain distance. After a moment, Dudian and Reed led the team to the main street. There were 50 or 60 figures gathered in the square of the street. They were wearing raincoats and holding umbrellas. They were waiting in the drizzle. These figures raised their umbrellas and loudly cheered Dudian's name as they saw Dudian's team. Reed slightly frowned as he was a little vigilant. He was in case the dark church or some bad guys hid in the crowd and attacked Dudian. The team moved forward in a straight line. The civilian team followed in the rain. They shouted Dudian's name and some praises. It was extremely lively. They attracted a lot of people who lived in the houses along the road. They opened their windows and doors as they heard the people shouting Dudian's name. Some people joined the team and shouted passionately. Dudian smiled as he drove the horse forward at a steady speed. For him, this was a show. Only through a show could he maximize the effect of the battle. Only their relatives and friends knew that they had died in the battlefield without saying a word. This was the work of a hot-blooded hero. Dudian obviously wasn't a hot-blooded person. Master is really loved by everyone. Reed looked at Dudian as he listened to the continuous cheers. His tone was full of admiration. Dudian smiled. Treat others with kindness, and you will get kindness in return. This is the truth, isn't it? Master is right. Reed agreed. After a moment, Dudian and Reed's escort team left the bustling commercial district and came to the suburbs. Reed's expression turned serious as they entered the suburbs. He ordered the team to protect Dudian in the middle as they moved forward in a diamond formation. While changing the formation, Dean suddenly noticed that the shield swordsman with extraordinary strength was the first to get close to him, and the rest quickly gathered and surrounded Dean. Dean looked left and right from time to time, but only when he looked at the swordsman on the left, his eyes paid a little attention. Dudian stopped his horse as they came to a plain near the river. The guards around him quickly stopped and looked at Dudian. Colonel, is the river in front of us? Dudian looked at Reed. Do you want to take me to the second line of defense at the river? As far as I know, it's just a preliminary barrier. If the barbarians don't attack the commercial district from the river, but take a detour through the snowfield in the north or the Blackwater Swamp in the south, then we won't be able to stop them in time. Reed forced a smile and said, Master, there are soldiers in both places. If there is a trace of barbarians, then we will immediately send an army. The battlefield at Red River is the safest. The barbarians won't be able to attack for a while because of Red River's blockade. The safest? Dudian deliberately showed anger on his face. Colonel, are you looking down on me? I'm going to the battlefield not to be protected, but to take you to kill the enemy. But you're taking me directly to the safest place. Why would I go to the battlefield instead of staying at home? Why kill the barbarians? Are you saying that everyone here is a coward who is afraid of death? Reed's face changed. The faces of the guards around Dudian also changed. They clenched the ropes and looked at Dudian in anger. But they didn't dare to refute. Master, every one of us is a warrior who has gone through countless battlefields. We have countless merits and scars. I hope you won't insult us. Reed said in a solemn tone. It's in order to take you to the river. We can't let anything happen to you. I can understand your mood. Everyone here is eager to go out and kill the enemy. But I hope Master won't make things difficult for us. Dudian frowned as he felt that it was a bit tricky. It seemed that he was negligent. Although the military had agreed to let him enter the battlefield, but they had locked him up. They were worried that something would happen to him. The military wouldn't take full responsibility if anything happened to him. The guards in front of him said that they were protecting him, but in fact they were jailers who imprisoned him. Chapter 382. Dean looked around, and his eyes fell on Reed. Colonel, I won't force you to go to the battlefield because of the military order. But it's your duty to abide by the order. It's not my duty. You have no right to restrict my freedom. Please remember that I'm not just a weak architect, but a knight. Although I haven't obtained the official identity of a knight, but I have passed the knight's written test and inherited the knight's spirit. What is the purpose of me donating the legendary item to the military for free? I hope that you can save the cost and invest it into the war so that less blood will flow and less people will die. Every death of a soldier means the destruction of a family. Don't tell me that you don't have parents. I believe that everyone here is very clear about the knight's spirit. Fight for glory, fight for the protection of the weak, fight for justice, and fight for the happiness of all people. This is what a knight should do. This is also my knight's code. Dean's eyes were like torches as he spoke in a righteous tone. Now you want a knight to cowardly hide in front of the barbarian attack? Watching your compatriots fall in front of you from the safety of the line of defense? He took a deep breath and spoke in a sonorous tone. I respect all of you for abiding by military orders. But I'm a knight, even though I haven't been appointed by the Knight's Hall, but at least I have an identity. That's a human, a man with courage. It's better for you to kill me now than to watch my compatriots die. It's humiliating and blasphemous to live like this. Reed and the others' faces changed. Some of them felt their blood boil as they heard Dean's words. They clenched their weapons and gritted their teeth to endure. Reed's heart shook as he looked at Dean's face. His ears were hot and his blood was burning. It was as if a flame was about to burst out from his chest. He took a deep breath and bowed his head. Mr. Dean, I'm sorry. Dean's heart sank as he heard the word sorry. His face turned gloomy. He stared at Reed and said, You are worthy to be a colonel. Military orders must be obeyed. I admire you, but I said that the military can only command you. You have no right to command me. Reed's face changed. Master, please don't make things difficult for us. Dean indifferently said, I'm not making things difficult for you. It's you who are making things difficult for me. If we enter the battlefield, then we can kill a lot of barbarians. Every barbarian we kill is equivalent to saving a soldier and a family that has been destroyed in the war. I don't know what you think, but I can't stand the sound of crying in the streets after the war is over. It will give me nightmares. Reed's face turned ugly as he clenched his teeth. He couldn't wait to blurt out and agree to Dean's words. But military orders had long been engraved in his bone marrow. It was because of these words that he became a senior colonel. Dean took out a roll of map from his backpack and spread it on the horse's back. He scanned the map and soon aimed at a circle mark. He looked at the surrounding route and put the map into his backpack. He looked at Reed. Colonel, you go to the Red Tail River. I'm going to Scarlet Canyon. Scarlet Canyon? Reed was startled. The barbarians are bound to sweep the commercial district if the Golden Wall is broken. They will first reach the Red Tail River. But if they see that it is difficult to cross the Red Tail River, then they will turn to other places. Scarlet Canyon is in front of the Blackwater Swamp in the south. If the barbarians go to the south, then they are bound to pass through Scarlet Canyon. Dudian slowly said, Scarlet Canyon is steep and difficult to climb. The path in the middle of the canyon is only 6 or 7 meters wide. It can only allow a small team to pass slowly. I will stay at the entrance of the canyon and fight with the barbarians." Reed was stunned. His eyes lit up as he looked at another young archer. "Jesse, give me the map." The young archer quickly took it out from his bag and handed it to Reed. Reed shook the map and quickly looked for the location of Scarlet Canyon. He looked up and down. There was a trace of surprise on his face as he looked at Dean. "Master, how did you find this place? This geographical advantage is too good." Dean raised his eyebrows. There was a puzzled expression on his face. He had looked at the map many times in the past few days. He had made sufficient preparations in order to wait for this day. Reed saw Dean's puzzled expression and immediately explained, "Master, on one side of the Scarlet Canyon, there is a big lake. There are a lot of mutated snakes, lizards, and some jungle beasts. Even elite troops would suffer heavy losses if they passed through there. The safest way is to pass through Scarlet Canyon. But Scarlet Canyon isn't very safe. There are rock snakes, stone beasts, and other monsters. Moreover, if you are ambushed, then you can throw boulders from the top of the canyon, and the whole army will be wiped out. It can be said that there is no good way to go. But most people will choose Scarlet Canyon. At least they are fast enough." Dean said, "Since I didn't make a wrong choice, then I'll set off." Then he pulled the reins and prepared to ride away. Seeing this, Reed said, "Master, please slow down. Our mission is to escort you to the Redtail River. But since you insist on not going, we can't force you to go. So why don't you let us follow you?" "All right." Dean's mouth curved. In fact, he knew that Reed and others wouldn't abandon him. The reason why he chose Scarlet Canyon was because it was suitable for small-scale operations. If he went alone, then even if he killed some barbarians, there would be no one to testify. After all, the most important thing about him was his weak identity as an architect. Moreover, it was impossible to have a big fight in this kind of terrain. With his tough attitude, Reed and the others couldn't help but follow him. "Captain, are we?" Another swordsman was worried as he saw Reed change his mind. Dean frowned and turned to look at the man. "Everyone, raise your hand if you are willing to follow me to kill the enemy. Remember that I'm talking about throwing away the military order." Whoosh! All of a sudden, everyone raised their hands. "That's it. Why are you being so sentimental? Let's go." Dean snorted and rode away. Everyone looked at each other. They were stunned and speechless. Reed wryly smiled. Dean was definitely the most wonderful master he had ever seen. But he was also the bravest and most fearless master he had ever seen. Thinking of this, a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. He licked his lips and said to the crowd, "Everyone, even if the Scarlet Canyon is attacked by the barbarians, there will not be a large-scale battle. With our ability, it will not be difficult to protect the Grandmaster. If the higher-ups want to hold us responsible, I will report the truth and take responsibility." Hearing this, the 20 people looked at each other. The nearest knight, holding a spear, said with bright eyes, "Captain, what are you talking about? If the higher-ups pursue this matter, I'm willing to bear the blame with you." "I'm also willing." "Me too. I also have a share." All of a sudden, everyone shouted loudly. Reed's heart warmed as he saw everyone's serious expression. "Good. In that case, let's go and kill them. Let's make those bastards go back lying down." "Good." Chapter 383. The sky was dark by the time Dean, Reed, and others arrived at Scarlet Canyon. The drizzle had stopped while they were on the way. The dark clouds hovering over their heads had thinned a lot. It wasn't as gloomy as it was a few days ago. Dean stood at the entrance of the canyon and looked up at the steep canyon. From the outside, it seemed as if a towering mountain had been cut open by a sharp weapon. There was a narrow gap in the canyon. They could only ride 4 people side by side. Some places were 6 or 7 meters wide, but some places were only 2 or 3 meters narrow. The walls on both sides of the canyon were uneven, but extremely steep and difficult to climb. The barbarians shouldn't be here at this time, but we should be careful and guard against the top. Reed reminded. Yes. 20 people answered. Dean and Reed rode side by side, for people were in front of them to open the way. They slowly went into the other side of the canyon. Along the way, The sound of horse hooves was crisp and clear. Everyone was silent and vigilant of their surroundings. After a few minutes, they arrived at the other side of the canyon. There was a small forest here, and the faint sound of a stream could be heard from the forest. According to the map, behind the forest was the Blackwater Swamp, where ferocious monsters lived. There was only a narrow path at the edge of the swamp. "Master, it's getting late. Let's set up camp and rest," Reed said. Duddian nodded and dismounted from a horse. He came to the edge of the canyon and looked inside. Although it was late, but it didn't hinder his vision. He reached out and touched the uneven rock wall. It felt rough. It was fluffy sandstone, which was more absorbent. If he climbed it, it would be easy to fall. Therefore, it was extremely difficult to reach the top of the canyon. However, the Blackwater Swamp behind the Scarlet Canyon and the Magic Hunting Forest on the other side were known as dangerous places. The wars between the knights and the rich in the commercial district would rarely continue to this area. So the military didn't pay too much attention to this natural barren area. However, the barbarians might not know about this. They were likely to come here when they were exploring the way. Moreover, even if these barbarians colluded with the forces inside the giant wall and had the map, most of them would send people here to inquire about the situation. After all, there was no army guarding this place. This point alone could be the reason for the barbarians to come here. "Master, do you want to drink water?" Reed handed Duddian a water bag. Dean shook his head slightly and took out a wide metal tube from his backpack. It was the waterproof thermos cup he smelted in his spare time. "I have water." "Master, you've really thought of everything." Reed sighed as he took back his water bag. "Master, you must be hungry. Would you like to eat some dry food?" Dean looked at the campsite and saw 20 people sitting around several bonfires. The bonfires were close to the rock wall of the canyon. It was not easy to see from the other side of the canyon. At the moment, the bonfires were barbecuing the limbs of unknown animals. Duddian nodded and followed Reed to sit by the bonfire. "Master, please." A blond youth handed Dean a piece of barbecued smoked meat. He was very polite. "My name is Port Allen. I come from the Molly family. Our family is rich in cherry fruit. It's particularly delicious. If Master likes to eat this, then you can come and find me. You can eat as much as you want. Moreover, we have it anytime and anywhere regardless of the season." Dean smiled. "Thank you, but I brought my own dry food. If there's an opportunity in the future, then send me a few packs to eat." He took out the dry food from his backpack. It was a small piece of compressed biscuit. He had specially made this dry food. It was much more filling than the dry food products carried by the hunters. Moreover, it took up less space and provided more calories. It was also very simple to make. "Master seems to be ready for a protracted war." Reed's face was full of admiration. Allen looked at the compressed biscuit in Dean's hand. "Master, what kind of bread is this? It looks very hard. Where did you buy it?" "I made it myself." Dean didn't say much. He put a piece into his mouth and slowly chewed. The taste was unpleasant, but the hunger in his stomach was alleviated a lot after eating a piece. He ate 3 pieces in a row, then tied the bag and sat around the fire to warm himself. The bonfire in his eyes was like a blazing red light. It was incomparably dazzling. The heat is almost covering the body. It would be great if I could freely control my eyes. Dean secretly thought. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It was still hot and red. He could not help but sigh. Allen saw that Dean didn't hand over the food, so he took it back and ate it himself. Reed took the map from Jesse's hand while eating the barbecue. He looked at Dean after a while. "Master, it would take 4 hours for the barbarians to reach here from the Golden Wall. 5 or 6 hours is possible if there are delays on the road. They had just broken through the Golden Wall, so most of the troops should be resting and reorganizing. They should send a vanguard team to continue the attack and survey the situation. So the number of the vanguard team will be small. But I heard that there are red-skinned barbarians who can go berserk and have amazing combat power. We have to be careful." Dean nodded and looked at the bonfire in silence. Reed looked at Allen and Jesse. "Be sure to protect the Master if we fight with the barbarians. You guys are responsible for taking care of the Master's safety. The rest of you will kill the enemy." "Understood," Jesse said briefly. Allen laughed. Captain, maybe the barbarians will go directly to the second line of defense. They won't come here. It's always good to take precautions. Reed said. The night deepened. About half an hour after they had set up camp, a figure suddenly ran out of the canyon. It was the person who was responsible for the reconnaissance at the other end of the canyon. Reed and the others were surprised as he appeared. They quickly grabbed their weapons and stood up. Captain, the barbarians are coming, the person said quickly. Reed immediately shouted, extinguish the bonfire and prepare for the battle. Team 3, you are responsible for protecting the master. 20 people were silent as they quickly moved. It took only a few seconds for the burning bonfire to be extinguished. They had already prepared the sand so that no sparks could be seen. Chapter 384. Da-da-da. In the dark canyon, the sound of hooves gradually came from far to near. After a moment, several figures riding strange beasts appeared in the sight of Dean and others. These people were burly, about 2 meters tall with strong muscles. Their whole body was wrapped in steel helmets, and their mounts were tied with rough weapons. They rushed over quickly. Kill! A cold light flashed in Reed's eyes as he stepped forward. He held his big sword and swung it out with a whistling sound. A barbarian was shocked as he saw Reed and others jump out. He wanted to stop his mount, but it was hard to stop. Instead, its soft abdomen was exposed to Reed's sword. The barbarian's abdomen was almost cut off. Blood sputtered out from the edge of the sword. The barbarian who was on the back of the mount rolled down. Whoosh! Several archers shot arrows at the barbarian. The barbarian wasn't able to get up and was nailed to the ground. On the other side, the shield swordsman and knight were not willing to fall behind. They quickly pounced on a few other savages. Their movements were swift, and they coordinated well with each other. They quickly knocked down a few of the startled mounts of the savages. They attacked with their swords and spears, killing them. Leave one alive, Reed roared as he pulled out his sword from the belly of the ferocious mount. In just a few minutes, 7 or 8 barbarians were caught off guard. All of them were killed. Only one was left alive, but his chest was pierced by an arrow. It wasn't fatal. The battle ended in a blink of an eye. Reed ordered the others to clean up the barbarian's body and the ferocious mount. He didn't want the barbarians to notice them. He brought the surviving barbarian to Dean. Master, there is one alive. We should arrest him and bring him back for interrogation. We have beast language masters in the military who understand the language of the barbarians. Dean looked at the barbarian and shook his head. This is just the beginning. They should be the vanguard of scouts. If they haven't returned, then they will send more people to investigate. Our duty should be to guard this place. Otherwise, we won't be able to compete with them by relying on the advantage of the canyon. The commercial district behind Blackwater Swamp will become their territory. Moreover, it will become an important stronghold for them to encroach on the entire commercial district. Reed was startled. He couldn't help but look at Dean. Finding the Scarlet Grand Canyon was just luck. But now he was able to point out the importance of the terrain. It was a pretty good military vision. Master is really an extraordinary genius. Reed sighed. His eyes fell on the struggling barbarian. His face turned cold as he kicked the barbarian's back. Let's waste his hands and feet. I'll do it. Jesse, who was at the side, took out a piece of cloth and stuffed it into the savage's mouth. Then he pulled out his dagger and cut off the savage's elbows like he was cutting tofu. At the same time, he cut off the tendons behind his ankles and the ligaments behind his knees. In an instant, the savage completely lost his ability to move and became a cripple. Barbarian's face was full of pain as he stared at Dean and others in anger. Dean squatted down and reached out to touch the armor on his body thoughtfully. Master, Reed softly called out as he saw Dean's appearance. Dean recovered from his thoughts. Leave the smell of blood here. If barbarians come again, then they won't be defenseless. Let's set up some traps first. Reed was startled. That's what I was thinking. He turned around and ordered. The night was getting darker. After more than an hour, another group of barbarians came from outside the canyon. These barbarians seemed to smell the blood of their own kind. They were more cautious when they entered the canyon. However, the barbarians didn't last long in front of Reed's trap. They were killed by the sneak attack of Reed's group. One of the barbarians was riding a monster mount. It couldn't be shot down, so it turned around and ran out of the canyon. This made everyone feel uneasy. Time flew by. Several teams of barbarians came from outside the canyon, but they were killed by Reed and others who relied on traps and sneak attacks. However, these savages were extremely ferocious and were much stronger than ordinary soldiers. In the continuous battle, one of the shield swordsmen was attacked by two savages working together with a monster mount. His head was bitten off, and he died with a grudge. Everyone leaned against the canyon wall. They were holding their blood-stained weapons in silence. Ever since the death of the shield swordsman, the cheerful atmosphere of wiping out the barbarians disappeared. Everyone knew that this was just the beginning. They only had a few people, and if the barbarians kept appearing at such a high rate, they would definitely die of exhaustion. Late at night, whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the cold night air, a group of people riding giant black wolves rustled as they arrived in front of Scarlet Canyon. The howling cold wind blew from the canyon like the mournful cries of the undead. They were led by a slender figure who was fully armed and wearing a lion helmet. She was riding on a mount that looked like a lion or a leopard that was nearly 3 meters tall. The mount was also fully armed, with a helmet made of steel on its forehead and scale-like soft armor on the claws and joints of its forelimbs. It had an extremely strong defensive ability when charging and breaking through enemy lines. Whoosh! The monster mount jumped agilely and stopped at a high slope in front of the canyon. The slender figure sitting on the back of the monster mount stood upright and looked forward. After a while, she suddenly drove the monster mount to the edge of the canyon entrance. She reached out and touched the rock wall of the canyon. She put her hand back to the tip of her nose and sniffed. She seemed to be relieved. She turned back and whispered a string of strange syllables in a low voice. When the wolf cavalry behind her heard her words, 4 of them immediately stepped forward and led the way into the gorge. The slender woman wearing a lion helmet patted them out. The monster mount followed them without a word. At the other end of the canyon, Reed and others quickly got up after hearing the news from an elite archer. They knew that the prey was coming. They clenched their weapons as their figures flashed. They appeared at the traps on both sides of the canyon. They were ready to wait for the prey to fall into the net. Whoosh! The sound of rustling wind and armor rubbing against each other gradually came from the canyon, but it sounded extremely weak in the howling cold wind. Reed's physique wasn't weak. Apparently, he heard the slight sound. His face changed. He raised his hand to make an ambush attack gesture. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this time, 3 figures riding giant wolves flew over, from hazy to clear, quickly expanding in the line of sight of Dean and others. Their whole bodies were covered in black armor, as if rushing from hell. Dean was startled. There was a trace of surprise in his eyes. These 3 barbarians were riding giant wolves. Their body heat was much more exuberant than the previous barbarians. They were like a group of flames. At this time, Reed roared and took the lead to kill with his sword. Kill! 13 warriors roared and rushed out from both sides of the ambush. Whoosh! Whoosh! The archers who were hiding in the crevices of the canyon took aim. The arrows pierced through the air and hit the bodies of the 3 giant wolf knights. Some of the arrows bounced off the giant wolf knight's armor, leaving only a dent. Plop! Plop! The giant wolf riders were caught off guard, and 2 of them fell from their giant wolves. One of them had his throat pierced and died on the spot, while the other was luckier. The giant wolf he was riding on had its front paw injured, and its body became unstable, causing it to fall. At this time, Reed, the other knights, and the shield swordsman had rushed out. However, they hadn't come close when a sharp, buzzing sound echoed. They saw an arrow coming from the depths of the dark canyon. It flew over the head of the remaining giant wolf knight and fell down in an arc. It shrouded the place where Reed and others appeared. Not good. Reed's face changed. He hurriedly waved his sword to block the arrow. However, the others behind him were not so lucky. Some of them could not dodge in time and were pierced in the chest, arm, or eye sockets by the sudden rain of arrows. They screamed and fell to the ground. The rest of the shield swordsmen who reacted faster immediately raised their shields and stood in front of their injured companions to cover their retreat. Whoosh! Whoosh! The archers who were hiding in the crevices of the cliff didn't think that there would be archers among the barbarians. They were shocked and quickly pulled their bows and arrows. They aimed at the back of the giant wolf knight. They didn't care whether they could hit the enemy or not. They simply used the number of arrows to offset the enemy's fierce firepower. At this moment, the giant wolf under the feet of the remaining giant wolf rider suddenly leaned forward and fell to the ground, its two front limbs broken. On the ground where it ran, in the crevices on both sides of the rock, there was a hair-thin steel wire knife embedded. This was an extremely famous hidden weapon of the military, and it could be said to be a demonic existence in terrain warfare. If used well, it could easily eliminate an enemy 10 times the size of the army. The barbarians behind the giant wolf knight were exposed after he fell down. All of them were fully armed and riding giant wolves. It seemed that they had already expected Reed's attack. They roared and rushed over. Reed's face changed. He was frightened and angry. He roared and waved his sword to kill the fallen giant wolf knight. Then he stood behind the steel wire knife and waved his sword to block the arrows while waiting for the other giant wolf knights to come over. Bang! Bang! The giant wolf knights rushed in front of the steel wire knife. The giant wolf's forelimbs were cut off. Its body rolled down and crushed the barbarians on its back. The giant wolf knight was aghast as he roared in a strange language. The giant wolf suddenly jumped and dodged when the giant wolf knight rushed in front of the steel wire knife. Reed roared as he brandished his sword to kill the wolf riders. He joined the others to meet them. Chapter 385. Quick, you guys go too. Dean said quickly. You don't need to protect me. Guard the canyon. The 6 people around Dean were anxiously watching the battle. They heard Dean's words, but didn't act for a while. One of them hesitated. Master, we have to protect your safety. If the captain can't stop them, then we will escort you out of here. Dean's eyebrows rose in anger. He grabbed the armor of the youth and roared. Fuck you. How can you tell me to leave at this time? What kind of soldier are you? What kind of warrior are you? Your companions are bleeding in front of you, and you want to leave? Master? F asterisk CKU. I'm a knight now. Don't F asterisk king block my way. Piss off. Dean pushed the youth out of the encirclement. He almost fell to the ground. The youth took a few steps back as he looked at Dean in astonishment. He couldn't help but smile. Knight? Was there such a rude knight? The other 5 people were surprised as they saw Dean's anger. They looked at each other and hesitated. Get out! Dean roared again. Their faces changed. One of them pulled out his weapon and rushed out of the canyon. It was obvious that he didn't want to care about too much. The others hesitated for a moment, but eventually rushed out with their weapons. Only 2 people and the youth who was pushed away by Dean were left in the same place. Dean glanced at the shield swordsman who was still next to him. His eyes flashed, and he continued to speak in an angry tone. What are you 2 doing? Are you going to attack? The shield swordsman was silent and indifferent. The other person was Port Allen, who was sitting next to Dean. He smiled. Mr. Dean, we have to stay to protect you. We can't afford to take the responsibility if you get hurt. Dean's face sank. He didn't say much as he saw the 2 of them insist. He took out the bow from his back and opened the quiver. He pulled out the arrow. You 2 better stay away from me. Don't hinder me. Okay. Port Allen smiled bitterly and retreated. The youth who was pushed away by Dean took a deep breath as he looked at the swordsman and Port Allen. He pulled out his weapon and rushed towards the battlefield in the canyon. Whoosh! An arrow whizzed past him as fast as a streamer. The sharp arrowhead cut through the air and penetrated the eye socket of a wolf knight. The sharp arrowhead slowly pierced his eyeball. The next moment, the wolf knight screamed and fell down. Reed and the others rushed to stab him to death. Whoosh! Whoosh! Dean quickly pulled out the arrow, put it on the string, and aimed. The arrow was like a star. It had reached the maximum shooting speed of the bow. However, he only used less than 30% of his strength. It was barely the strength of a senior hunter. Puff! 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 With each arrow, a giant wolf knight would fall. It was as if this was not an arrow, but a summoning, the summoning of the Grim Reaper. The 5 archers who were hiding in the crevices of the rock were surprised to see the arrows. They looked back and saw that the arrows were shot from Dean's hand. They didn't expect that the architect, who only knew how to shout, would be stronger than them in archery. It seemed that the bow on his back wasn't just for decoration. Several people felt ashamed as they saw this. They quickly shot their arrows. Their eyes narrowed as they concentrated on covering Reed and the others in front. Puff! The sound of an arrow was heard as it fell down and nailed the throat of a wolf knight in front of Reed. The wolf knight didn't have the time to stab his spear as it came to an abrupt stop and fell from the wolf knight's body. Reed breathed a sigh of relief. He hurriedly raised his sword and chopped the wolf's head. The sword split the helmet on its head and split its skull. Kill! Reed's morale was like a rainbow after he killed the wolf knight. He roared as he waved his sword. The wolf knights who were sweeping towards him retreated in defeat. 3 wolf knights were the limit in this narrow canyon. Reed and others had to face the attacks of 3 wolf knights at the same time. They also had to face the arrows from behind. But similarly, Reed and the others could only fight 5 people side by side. The rest of the people were fighting the wolf cavalry in the back. They were cooperating with the 5 archers in the back. They didn't fall into a disadvantageous position for a while. However, as Dean's arrows entered the battlefield, the pressure on Reed and others was greatly reduced. Most of the wolf cavalrymen who were in front of them were either injured or dead. Port Allen and the shield swordsman had the deepest feeling. Dean's arrows weren't the same type of weapon as the arrows of the other 5 archers. Dean's technique was much faster than the other 5 archers. Dean would shoot 5 arrows every time the other 5 archers shot 3 arrows. It was an extremely terrifying, progressive number. Moreover, Dean's arrows were different from the other 5 archers. Every time he shot an arrow, there would be a wolf knight who would be hit. Moreover, most of the arrows would hit the wolf knight's vital parts. Port Allen and the shield swordsman knew that the 5 archers weren't weak. On the contrary, the youth's archery was too terrifying. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him a master archer. His arrows would hit the target every time the wolf knight moved at high speed. Moreover, his ability to predict the arrows was extremely high. Alan Port and the shield swordsman knew very well that it wasn't because the 5 archers were too weak. On the contrary, it was because the young man next to them was too horrifying an archer. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him a sharpshooter. His shots were almost always accurate. Also, when the giant wolf cavalrymen were moving at high speed, he could still attack where he wanted to hit. Especially in the case of rapid shooting, there was no time to predict slowly. To be able to do it like Dean was almost unheard of. They naturally didn't know that this was just the basic skill of a senior archer. Although Dean had practiced archery for a short time, he would practice whenever he had time. Moreover, his physique was already at the peak of senior hunter's level. Coupled with his keen eyesight, it was easy for him to point at the target in this short distance of less than 100 meters. Even if he was shooting at a live target like the wolf knight, there was no exception. After all, the canyon was so big and the opponent had limited space to dodge. Naturally, it was easy for him to predict the opponent's movements. This was incredible in the eyes of the layman, but in his opinion, it was just the basics. Whoosh! Dean squinted his eyes to let himself see more clearly. He shot at a wolf knight who was about to bite a knight. Dean felt a chill coming from the side as he loosened his fingers. He suddenly dodged sideways. Whoosh! He felt pain in his arm. He didn't have time to look at his arm as he quickly pulled out the dagger and coldly stared at the shield swordsman. Although he had been shooting arrows earlier, he was different from the other archers. He was not fully focused, but part of his attention had been on the shield swordsman next to him with an abnormal physique. Based on the military speculation, this shield swordsman was either someone sent to protect him secretly in the team, or he was someone who was secretly assassinating him. There were only 2 possibilities. Otherwise, it was impossible to explain why a senior hunter would hide in the team like an ordinary shield swordsman. Moreover, he noticed that the shield swordsman was intentionally or unintentionally getting close to him. Even when Reed arranged people to protect him, the shield swordsman quickly stood in a conspicuous place. Chapter 386. There was a trace of shock in the brown eyes of the swordsman under the helmet. He didn't expect that Dean could escape his fatal blow in a hurry when he was concentrating on shooting the arrow. Moreover, he found that the speed of Dean's dodge was as fast as a phantom. Even he couldn't achieve such a rapid movement, so that his long-awaited shot failed and only scratched Dean's arm. Aaron Port, who was next to him, was shocked by the sudden change and froze on the spot. Dean clenched the dagger in his right hand and stared at the swordsman coldly. Countless thoughts flashed in his mind. He didn't expect that the biggest danger on the battlefield would not come from the enemy, but from his own back. He was a little cold and palpitating at the same time. If he hadn't obtained the magic mark of the splitter, and his body had undergone earth-shaking changes, he was afraid that this blow would have pierced his heart. Whoosh! The swordsman was only shocked for a moment after Dean unexpectedly dodged his attack. He quickly reacted and held his sword to attack again. Courting death. Dean's eyes were cold. He didn't retreat, but moved forward. He stepped forward and got close to the shield swordsman. His shoulder moved sideways and pressed against the shield swordsman's chest. He waved his dagger to block the swordsman's sword. His wrist fiercely exerted force. A strong force broke out from the dagger. The shield swordsman was hit in the face. Bang! The shield swordsman was caught off guard. His face was hit, and he retreated backward. Dean growled and quickly caught up with him. The swordsman was shocked. This was completely inconsistent with the information he got. How could this be an intermediate hunter? He was even more terrible than a senior hunter. Even with his physique, his body couldn't keep up with Dean's speed. What kind of concept was this? There was only one thought in his mind, and that was that the boy in front of him was hiding his true strength. The combat power of a 16-year-old senior hunter was simply unimaginable. Seeing Dean chasing after him, he had no time to think. He gritted his teeth, endured the pain in his face, and waved his sword to kill again. The sword light danced like a snow-white silver light, enveloping Dean's whole body. Exquisite swordsmanship. Without hard work and training, it would be difficult to achieve this just by relying on one's physique. Dean's pupils were fixed, and his eyes seemed to be gently contracting and adjusting. The sword light that was as fast as a phantom quickly became traceable in his eyes, as if it had stopped. Different postures appeared clearly in his sight, as if he was flipping through a still photo. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. He didn't have time to think. While he was retreating, he suddenly saw a gap in the sword light. His eyes lit up, and he suddenly stood up and attacked. Ding! The sword light was blocked by the dagger. Dean quickly moved in front of the shield swordsman, swung his injured left hand, and smashed it on the swordsman's chest. The shield swordsman's chest armor seemed to be dented. Dean's eyes could see that the swordsman's heart contracted fiercely when the fist came out. It trembled violently, and the flesh and blood around the heart swayed gently, causing the blood flow to be impeded. Puff! The shield swordsman spat out a mouthful of blood and retreated a few steps. Dean caught up with him at a faster speed. The dagger in his hand quickly slashed at the wrist of the swordsman holding the sword. In the blink of an eye, the wrist was cut off. The hand holding the sword fell to the ground, and blood gushed out. The shield swordsman screamed in pain and turned to run. Dean's eyes were cold. He threw the dagger and shot the back of the shield swordsman. The shield swordsman trembled in pain and almost fell, but he didn't know where the strength came from. But he still staggered and ran quickly. Dean put an arrow on the bow, took aim, narrowed his eyes, and suddenly shot. Whoosh! The arrow pierced the back of the shield swordsman and nailed him to the ground. From the sudden attack of the shield swordsman to the counterattack of Dean, only about 10 seconds had passed. Dean put away the bow and quickly rushed over. He saw that the shield swordsman had died, but he was not killed by his own arrow. Black poisonous blood was flowing out of his mouth, exuding a strange smell. At first glance, he knew that it was a very fast poison, so that he wouldn't be saved when he committed suicide. Poison? Dean was shocked when he saw the black, poisonous liquid. He hurriedly looked at his left hand. His left hand was swollen. It was as thick as his calf. The wrist guard on his left hand was bulging. Because there was no pain nerve damage in his left hand, he didn't feel any difference. The sword is dipped in poison, fuck. Dean cursed. He hurriedly untied the left wrist guard, tore the sleeve, and tightly tied the left shoulder to prevent the poisonous blood from flowing back to the heart. Master! Alan reacted and hurriedly ran over. Looking at Dean's poisoned left hand, he hurriedly said, Master, you are poisoned. Let me bleed and bandage your wound. Dean took a deep breath and said, Hurry up, disinfect, and bleed. Yes. Alan turned around and touched the dagger, took out the first aid kit, and took out a lot of small things. Dean stared at his left hand. Now that he didn't have the magic mark, his resistance to these toxins was greatly reduced. He suddenly realized that he should habitually bring some first aid detoxification drugs in the future. Hurry up. Dean turned his head to urge Alan. Who would have thought that as soon as he turned his head, he would see Alan holding a dagger towards him? Alan's face was full of murderous intent. The dagger was pitch black and flowing with liquid. Obviously, it wasn't disinfectant alcohol. Dean's pupils shrank. He quickly rolled on the ground to escape Port Alan's thrilling stab. He turned over and climbed up. As soon as he stood up, he saw Port Alan chasing him, waving a dagger to stab his chest. There's another one. Dean's eyes widened as he dodged Alan's attack. He raised his knee and hit Alan's abdomen. His right hand grabbed Alan's throat and twisted. With a crack, Port Alan didn't even have time to scream before he fell to the ground, dead. Dean gasped for breath as he sat on the ground. He was about to take out his first aid kit to bandage his wounds when he heard the roar of the wolf cavalry. He looked back and saw that Reed and others were retreating under the charge of the wolf cavalry. They were almost out of the mouth of the canyon. Dean slightly gritted his teeth, grabbed the first aid kit, and came to the entrance of the canyon. He said to a youth who was constantly shooting arrows, Come over, bandage me, and let me bleed. The youth was surprised to see Dean suddenly appear. He was even more scared when he saw Dean's injured left hand. He hurriedly said, Master, are you injured? I told you to bandage my wound. Dean didn't have the patience to talk anymore. He roared. The youth was scared but hesitated for a second. The youth was shocked. He only hesitated for a second, but still gritted his teeth and put on the bow. He quickly took out a first aid kit and bandaged Dean. Dean quickly pulled his bow and shot an arrow at the wolf cavalry in front of him. Whoosh! The arrow pierced the throat of a wolf cavalry who was rushing towards Reed. Dean knocked another arrow, and another wolf cavalryman fell. The pressure on Reed and others was greatly reduced after the death of 2 wolf cavalry. But no one dared to look back because of the urgency of the battle. Otherwise, their heads would be thrown into the sky. The archer, who was about to help Dean bandage the wound, was shocked when he saw Dean's arrow. Dean panted slightly after shooting 3 arrows. He roared at the young archer. What the fuck are you doing? The young archer was shocked by Dudion's roar. He quickly took out his dagger and wiped it clean. Then he took out some anesthetic powder and some detoxification powder. Master, it may be a little painful. Please bear with it. Chapter 387. Don't use the anesthetic powder. Hearing Dean's words, the young archer was startled. He hesitated for a moment, but he still put away the anesthetic powder. He had seen that Dean's arm was infected with a highly toxic poison and must be cleaned and bandaged immediately. The situation was extremely urgent. If he waited for the anesthetic powder to take effect, it would take at least 5 to 10 seconds. This was the best quality military anesthetic powder, and this short anesthetic time was likely to affect Dean's life. Master, please stop for a moment. I'll bandage it for you. You must hold on. Dean quickly pulled out an arrow and aimed. The arrowhead once again pierced the throat of a giant wolf knight. He turned his head and stared at the young archer. He didn't even have the mood to say a word. He grabbed the dagger from the archer's hand and stabbed it along the wound on his left hand. Black poisonous blood splashed out from the wound. He lowered his arm so that the poisonous blood didn't splatter on the archer's face. Dean threw the dagger back to the young archer as he saw the poisonous blood flowing out. He continued to hold the bow in his right hand and pulled out the arrow with his left hand. Make another cut on the arm and let the blood out. You only need to bandage it. Don't worry about anything else. The young archer was startled, but reacted quickly. He took out the disinfectant gauze and wrapped it around Dean's arm. He forced the poisonous blood out of Dean's arm. Dean took off the quiver from his back and inserted it into the soil in front of his feet. It was inconvenient to take the arrow backhand while bandaging the wound. It was much faster to take the arrow directly in front of him. His eyes were fixed on the place where Reed and others were blocking. Arrows were shot at the giant wolf cavalry that were attacking him. The young archer's bandaging was a bit difficult. Dean's arm was constantly shaking, so he had to move along with Dean's arm. Fortunately, Dean's arm always maintained a mechanical shaking range, so he quickly found a rhythm. He quickly cleaned the wound, forced out the poisonous blood, sprinkled antidote powder, and bandaged the wound. Dean's archery was somewhat disturbed during the process of bandaging the wound. He didn't continue to aim at the throat, eyeball, and other small parts. Instead, he locked on the wolf's body. The sharp arrows easily penetrated the parts of the wolf's body that weren't covered by the protective gear. The barbarian cavalrymen on their backs were also affected. Some of them fell down, although some of them were barely riding on the wolf's body, but it was difficult for them to accurately wield their weapons. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of arrows was like the summoning of the undead. Every time the sound echoed, a wolf would scream and fall down. The morale of Reed and others rose. They resisted the rain of arrows from the wolf cavalry while fighting against the wolf cavalry. The lethality of the wolf riders was greatly reduced after losing the support of the giant wolves. Reed and the others pounced on them and quickly beheaded them. However, in this chaotic battlefield, 2 knights and a shield swordsman were killed by the wolf riders. Their deaths were tragic. It was a cruel and bloody scene, as if they had stepped into hell from a human world. More than half of the wolf cavalry died in the blink of an eye. The passage in the canyon was blocked. The wolf archers behind the wolf cavalry were exposed to Dean's arrows. Dean noticed that there was a very strong red heat behind the wolf archers. It was much higher than the heat emitted by Reed's body. He wanted to warn Reed, but he stopped himself. He continued to use his arrows to kill the wolf archers. The wolf archers lost the protection of the cavalry. Reed and others cooperated with Dean's arrows and quickly beheaded several archers. Even the wolf archers were killed by Dean. Dean turned to look at the young archer who was bandaging his left hand. He saw that his left hand had reduced a lot in just a short time. His heart was slightly relieved. It seemed that the poison smeared by the shield swordsman was not an incurable poison. However, this may be related to the physique of a senior hunter. Although his immunity was not as strong as before, but at least it was much stronger than the majority of senior hunters. If an ordinary person was poisoned by this poison, it was estimated that they would fall to the ground and die on the spot. But the archer persisted for half a minute. It was less than half a minute from the time he was injured to the end of the battle. Moreover, his left arm was strangled, so the poison didn't flow into his body. His brain and heart weren't affected. What a strong poison! The young archer was sweating. He smelled the pungent smell of the poisonous blood. He was frightened. If he didn't disinfect the blood, then it would be too late. Dean pulled out the quiver and put it on his back. He rushed to the front of the battlefield. The young archer's face changed. "Master, you want to—" Dean came to about 40 to 50 meters behind Reed and others. He quickly shot an arrow. The swelling on his left hand had reduced a lot. A lot of black blood burst out from the wound as he pulled out the arrow. The white disinfectant gauze was quickly dyed. Whoosh, whoosh. The wolf archers quickly fell under the arrows of Reed, Dean, and the others. Reed and the others were already in front of the wolf archers. Their attacks became more and more ferocious without the long-range arrows of the wolf archers. Their arrows were always flying at the right time. The wolf archers retreated and fell one after another. A majestic shadow jumped out from behind a fallen wolf archer as Reed and the others were advancing. It was a ferocious beast that looked like a lion and a leopard. It jumped 3 or 4 meters high and directly jumped over the fallen wolf archer's mount. It jumped in front of Reed, who was rushing in front of him. Reed was shocked and hurriedly raised his sword to block. Roar! The lion-leopard monster roared as it opened its mouth to bite Reed's arm. Reed raised his sword to block the monster's attack and bit his arm. Reed's sword was cut by its sharp teeth. Reed was sweating because of the pain. He wanted to struggle, but there was a tearing pain. At this time, he felt a chill on his head. He looked up and saw a shadow like a black scimitar coming towards him. His pupils shrank as he shrank his body. He didn't care about the pain on his arm as he bent down. He heard a cracking sound as his arm was torn off by the ferocious beast. Fresh blood spurted out, and the black scimitar on top of his head also slashed through his hair. A chill went straight to the top of his head, causing his entire body to feel cold. Cold sweat broke out, and he had a terrifying feeling as if his scalp was being kissed by the god of death. "Captain!" A shield swordsman's eyes turned red. He roared and raised his shield to block in front of Reed. Bang! The ferocious monster's front hooves stomped down on the shield swordsman's raised shield. The heavy force came crashing down, trampling the shield swordsman to death under the shield, causing a pool of blood to splash out. However, the moment the shield was trampled, the shield swordsman reached out and pulled the injured Reed away from the ferocious monster. Reed saw the pool of blood under the hoof of the monster. He roared and used his other arm to pick up the spear of a dead knight. He roared and rushed towards the ferocious beast. There was a slender woman sitting on the back of the ferocious beast. She was wearing a fur armor and a lion helmet. She saw Reed rushing towards her. She coldly snorted and waved her black scimitar. Whoosh! Suddenly, a horrifying cold air attacked him. The slender woman's pupils shrank as she hurriedly bent down. Whoosh! An arrow whizzed past her back the moment she bent down, leaving a dent in the beast fur on her back armor. It almost hit her back armor. The slender woman raised her head. Her wheat-colored face was pale. She felt the hairs on her body stand up. She stared at the front of the canyon. She saw a thin figure standing behind Reed and the others. He was holding a bow in his hand. His expression was as cold as ice. There wasn't the slightest emotion on his face. He was completely different from the hot-blooded warriors in front of him. He was like a piece of cold ice. But she could clearly feel that this youth was the most terrifying existence. It was as if he was the only one in the entire canyon. Chapter 388. Dean frowned when he saw that the arrow didn't hit the target. The bow in his hand barely reached the strength requirement of a senior hunter. If it was fully pulled, it would be difficult for a senior hunter to avoid the arrow. However, the injury on his left hand made him worried. He didn't pull the bow fully. He thought that it would be effective in a surprise attack, but he didn't expect that it would not work. He sighed in his heart as he saw Reed pounce on him again. He aimed at him again. Seeing that the boy was aiming at her again, Yvette's whole body tensed up. Anger suddenly arose from the bottom of her heart. With a low shout, she untied the buckle on the other side of the horse's leg and took out her shield. She always thought that a shield was a shame for a warrior. There weren't many enemies that she could use a shield to fight. Dean frowned as he saw the other side take out the shield. His eyes flashed as his arm moved down to aim at the woman's mount. Kill! At the same time, Reed roared as he rushed towards the monster's mount along with two other swordsmen. Yvette's face changed as she bent down and stuck close to the mount. She used her shield to block the arrow. At the same time, she waved her black scimitar towards the swordsmen who were attacking. Puff! Puff! The shields of the shield swordsmen were cut off by the black scimitar. Two shield swordsmen died in an instant. Reed's spear was also cut off. Only the spear's shaft was left. Two shield swordsmen died in an instant. Reed's spear was also cut off. Only the shaft was left. Reed was stunned as he saw the two swordsmen fall to the side. He was so angry that his face was deformed. He clenched his teeth as he turned around and ran. He thought of his mission. It wasn't to defend the canyon, but to protect Dean. He valued Dean's life more than the Southern Commercial District. He couldn't let him die on the battlefield. After all, even if the Southern Commercial District fell, he could mobilize troops from the Commercial District to defend and resist. There was still a chance to fight. An arrow whizzed over his head as he turned to run. Reed saw a thin figure standing at the entrance of the canyon. The figure calmly pulled out an arrow and shot it. The arrow passed by his cheek. The wind from the arrow cut his cheek and made him feel a little pain. He was stunned. In the next moment, a painful howl came from behind him. Reed looked back and saw the ferocious monster. There was an arrow piercing its jaw. The arrow pierced the gap between its teeth and lips. The monster's saliva splashed on Reed's face as it shook its head. Reed was startled as he turned and ran. He saw Dean pulling out arrows at the entrance of the canyon. Every time an arrow was shot, there would be a scream from the monster behind him. Yvette was furious when she heard the painful scream of her beloved beast. The man inside the wall was too despicable. He specifically shot at the feet of her mount. Even if she was close to the mount, she couldn't use her shield to block the arrows. These arrows were extremely destructive and penetrating. Even the forelimbs protected by protective gear were injured by the arrows. Puff, puff. She waved the black scimitar in her hand as she killed the people inside the wall. Her eyes almost spurted out fire as she stared at the skinny boy. She jumped from the back of the mount. When Yvette jumped over Reed's head, Yvette kicked him on the shoulder. Reed's body leaned forward and fell to the ground. He tumbled a few times. Yvette rushed forward while holding the shield in front of her. She landed on the ground and rushed towards Dean. 4 archers in front of Dean shot at her, but the distance was only a dozen meters. She easily blocked the arrows with her shield. She crossed the distance in the blink of an eye. Yvette's black scimitar quickly hooked over the archers who were hiding in the rock wall. The heads of the archers slid down and were neatly sliced. Dean's eyes were gloomy as he looked at the female barbarian who was rapidly approaching him. He slowly put away the bow and pulled out the sword from his waist. His eyes narrowed as he stared at her. His arm muscles bulged like a preheating engine. He was accumulating strength. Yvette roared as she approached Dean. She waved the black scimitar under the shield. Dean's heart was calm. When the black scimitar was waved, his pupils slightly glanced at it. He clearly saw the trajectory of the black scimitar's movement. It was like a fast-flipping photo. There were countless interruptions. Although each interruption was very short, he could feel the interruption. The accumulated time of this interruption was enough for his brain to dominate his body to respond. Tilting his head back slightly, he avoided the black scimitar. At the same time, the sword in his hand suddenly stabbed out, swinging away the black scimitar. At the same time, his left hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed the edge of the shield. Fall! Dean's calm face suddenly raised his eyebrows, and he roared like thunder. Yvette was shocked by the roar. Her arm that was holding the shield was suddenly pulled into Dean's arms. Her arm instinctively pulled back, but she felt the terrifying strength coming from the other side. Her fingers couldn't hold the shield tightly, and it was thrown away by Dean. The shield disappeared into the darkness. Yvette was shocked. She quickly waved the black scimitar to cut Dean's neck. Dean saw the trajectory of the scimitar and raised his sword to block it. Clang! The sword was cut off, but the momentum of the scimitar didn't reduce. Dean's pupils shrank as he quickly bent down. At the same time, the soles of his feet hit the opponent's lower abdomen. Yvette didn't expect Dean to use such a rogue move. She was surprised and quickly used the scimitar to cut Dean's back. She believed that Dean wouldn't be able to fight back in such a posture. Bang! Dean's head hit Yvette's lower abdomen. The heavy force caused his body to fly out and fall to the ground. Yvette's scimitar successfully stabbed into Dean's back and cut open his back armor. The scimitar couldn't pierce through Dean's body because of the armor's resistance. It only left a very long bloodstain on his back. Dean's left hand was injured before, so he didn't feel any pain. Instead, the burning pain in his back aroused a strong, killing intent in his heart. He rushed forward with both hands. Before the other side could get up, he quickly reached out and pressed her hand that was holding the weapon. He roared and twisted her wrist. Yvette's wrist was broken by Dean's strength. She screamed in pain. Dean quickly reached out and grabbed her throat. His nails were much sharper than before since he got splitter magic marks. Although he didn't have the ability to cut through metal but his nails were sharp enough to cut through any material. His nails immediately cut through the skin of Yvette's neck as he used his strength to stab her. No! Yvette screamed in horror. Dean wanted to stop her struggle, but when he heard her scream, he was stunned. Is this in English? Yvette noticed that Dean was absent-minded. Her other hand reached for a stone on the ground. She was ready to attack. Dean seemed to have seen it and suddenly reacted. He twisted her hand and slapped her face. His eyes were full of anger. Do you want to die? Yvette's face was in pain. Chapter 389. Master, are you okay? Reed and several archers quickly came to support. They saw that Dean had subdued the extraordinary female barbarian. They were anxious and shocked. The female barbarian had killed the shield swordsman with ease. They didn't expect that she would be subdued by Dean, who was a master of invention. It was incredible. Dean dislocated the other arm of the female barbarian. He put his knee on her stomach and grabbed her neck. He looked at Reed and others. I'm fine. Kill the other barbarians first. Don't let them run away. Reed and others reacted and quickly went back to defend. The archers who were hiding in the dents in the surrounding rock walls quickly came out and raised their shields to block the sharp arrows of the giant wolf archers behind them. Since this was a protection mission, even though they were lightly armed archers, they were all equipped with shields and short swords to prevent a melee attack. Bang! Bang! The arrows shot by the giant wolf archers fell on the shields like dense raindrops, clanking loudly. Reed squatted in front of Dean. He saw that Dean's left hand was wrapped in gauze. Master, are you hurt? It's nothing. Dean spoke quickly. You look after her. Reed knew that the female barbarian was the leader of the barbarians. She had an extraordinary physique. He quickly held down the female barbarian and called the young archer to tie her up. Yvette was angry. She violently struggled, but her arms were weak. She struggled and rolled on the ground by relying on the strength of her legs and waist. Her neck was held by Reed. Another young archer rushed over and tied her up. Dean handed over the female barbarian to Reed. He quickly got up and took out the bow and arrow from his back. He quickly pulled the bow and shot at the giant wolf archers that were coming from the canyon. Puff! Puff! Blood bloomed as the arrows were shot. The wolf archers didn't get close to Dean before they fell down. Some of them died on the spot. Perhaps the leader was arrested, but the wolf archers were crazy. They completely forgot that the best way to fight an archer was to distance themselves. They roared and rushed towards Dean. Dean shot 4 or 5 of them. The barbarians in the back didn't have the intention to get out of the battle. They kept rushing forward. Dean cooperated with the other archers and 2 warriors to resist the enemy. After a few minutes, all the wolf archers were killed, but they didn't fear death. One of the archers didn't dodge and was pierced in the face by an arrow. He died on the spot. Corpses were everywhere in the canyon. Blood flowed like a river. Dean and others were relieved when the last barbarian archer was killed. Some of them leaned against the rock wall and gasped for breath. Some of them quickly ran to the battlefield and searched for the bodies of their companions. Some of them quickly bandaged their wounds and rushed over to deal with Reed's broken arm. Dean put away the bow and arrow and returned to the mouth of the canyon. His sense of smell allowed him to hear bursts of smashing sound from the smell of blood. It was like the screams of ghosts. His heart was uncomfortable. Although he had seen more bloody scenes than this in the past, but at that time he wasn't psychologically able to bear it. But at this moment in the state of synesthesia, he had to bear greater sensory stimulation. This was probably a disadvantage of being too sensitive. He sat down against the wall of the canyon. He untied the gauze on his left hand. Although the previous bandage was good, but the gauze had been soaked with black blood. He needed to change it. Master, Reed came to Dean's side after bandaging his broken arm. I've seen your injury. Was it caused by those too? Dean looked at him and continued to clean the wound. Yes. Don't tell me that you have received such an order. If so, now is the best time for you to act. I don't have any strength left. Reed smiled. Master, how can I accept such an order? I'll report this matter and give you a satisfactory answer. This is the problem of the military. I'm really sorry that you almost lost your life. It's nothing. Dean indifferently said, "There are a few moths in any organization. The military doesn't have the final say." Reed shook his head. There was anger in his eyes. "No matter what they think, you have donated the legendary item to the military for free. But there are people who arranged people to assassinate you. They are worse than beasts. They are better than beasts. Beasts aren't that smart." Dean's tone was indifferent. His technique was quick. Soon, the rotten flesh on his left hand was cut off and replaced with new gauze and detoxification powder. His left hand was completely loyal, which made him feel relieved. Reed forced a smile and said, "Master, we have suffered heavy losses this time. I'm afraid it will be very difficult to defend the canyon with the remaining people. Let's go back and ask the military to send people to guard the canyon. It's too dangerous if there are assassins among the remaining people." Dean turned to look at the canyon. He pondered for a moment. "Well, you send someone back to pass the message. The rest of you stay here with me." Reed replied, "Master, there are only 8 of us left. Moreover, some of us are injured. I'm afraid we'll be wiped out if another team of wild wolf cavalry comes. 8 people are enough. I can defend even if another team of wild lion comes." Dean said. Reed was startled. He didn't know where Dean's confidence came from, but he was convinced by Dean's extraordinary strength. But he was still a bit worried. "Master, from now on, you should call me Mr. Dew or Knight." Dean patted his shoulder. "Don't worry. I'll retreat if I can't hold it. I won't die here. I'll let the military take responsibility." Reed smiled. "I'm afraid that there will be people who want to assassinate you." "It's okay. I'm prepared. I'm also on guard against you." Dean laughed. Reed sighed as he saw Dean's determination. He finally knew why the military allowed the master to go to the battlefield. He was afraid that the generals would be helpless against such a stubborn temperament. After discussing with Dean, Reed picked out a young archer who was lightly injured. He rode a horse and went back to pass the message. "Captain, do you want me to take the 2 prisoners back?" the young archer asked as he got on the horse. Reed shook his head. "We'll send them back together after the battle is over." Dean knew that Reed was worried that the young archer was sent to assassinate him. Reed was worried that the young archer would take the opportunity to kill the 2 prisoners. After all, assassinating Dean in such a critical period represented a lot of things. From the perspective of interests, the military would be affected the most if the assassination was successful. In other words, someone was going against the military. Moreover, it was likely that the person was a member of the military. Even if it wasn't, the person had great power and could penetrate into the top level of the military. It was likely that these people were colluding with the barbarians. That's why they would use the assassination of Dean to attack the military in this critical period. When the young archer heard this, he gave a few reminders of safety before riding his horse away. "I didn't expect someone to assassinate the master. It's too hateful." The others were angry as they knew about the situation. Dean looked at the crowd. "Everyone take a break. Clean up the corpses of the enemies in the passage and pile them up. We'll block the canyon as a barrier. In addition, the bodies of the 2 people who tried to assassinate me should be preserved in a storage bag. We'll be able to find some clues from their bodies." Chapter 390. After the previous fierce battle, there were only 8 warriors left. 10 of them were sacrificed in the battle, and the remaining 2 were killed by Dean because they failed to assassinate Dean. Now 1 of them was sent back to report the news. Only 7 warriors were left. Including Reed and Dean, there were 9 of them. "Master, have you practiced archery before?" Reed curiously asked Dean as the others were dealing with the corpses in the canyon. Dean checked his bow to see if there were any signs of loosening. "I have practiced for more than a year." "Only for more than a year?" Reed's eyes widened as he was surprised. "Your archery is so powerful after practicing for such a short time. I've seen archers in the army who have practiced for 4 or 5 years. They wouldn't be as accurate as you." "Indeed," another archer said. "If it wasn't for Master's help then, we would have been wiped out by the giant wolf cavalry. Especially that female barbarian. She is too strong." Dean indifferently said, "The intensity of practice is different. Time is useless. Moreover, many things depend on talent." Reed was dumbfounded. That's true. The young archer's face turned red. If someone else had said such words, he would have refuted a few words. But after seeing Dean's archery skills, he couldn't help but be convinced. Among the 6 skills of the knight, there was absolutely no problem in archery. In terms of horsemanship, he was also fully qualified. He could be called a real knight. Dean turned to look at the female barbarian who was tied to the ground. He looked at Reed and others. Do barbarians speak the language of beasts? Do any of them understand human language? Reed was surprised. Master, why do you say that? I'm just asking. Oh, I heard that the royal family of barbarians seems to know some strange language. It's the exclusive language of their royal family. The rest of the barbarians don't have the conditions to learn it. They only know some primitive beast language, which is relatively simple. Reed said. Dean was startled. Royal family? Was this woman royalty among the barbarians? Yvette noticed that the boy who captured her was looking at her. She felt that the latter seemed to be talking about her. She was a little angry, but more worried. She didn't expect to meet such a powerful person inside the wall in this remote place. At this moment, she only hoped that her mount could send a message back to the fortress so that the chief would send someone to rescue her. Dean saw the anger and hatred in the eyes of the female barbarian. He thought of something and asked Reed, "Where is her mount?" Reed was startled as he turned to look at the canyon. His face changed as he quickly got up and ran into the canyon. After a moment, he returned. His face was extremely ugly as he looked at Dean. The beast ran away. Dean was surprised. Did he run away? Logically speaking, this savage should have a very close relationship with his mount. Why would he run away? Could it be that after this female savage was captured by him, she used a method that he did not know to send away his mount? He frowned as he looked at Reed. Let everyone collect the corpses and pile up the barrier. If the beast runs back to send a message, then we'll have to face a long battle. Reed was also aware of this point. He nodded and ran into the canyon. He relied on his one arm to help the others to clean up the corpses. Dean adjusted the bowstring and put it back on his back. He got up and came in front of the female barbarian. He squatted down and looked at the contour of her face. He found that it was quite similar to the Europeans of the old era. The ancestors of these barbarians were probably the survivors of the area. It also proved that some of the people survived the devastating disaster. However, how could there be such a situation if the survivors lived inside the giant wall? Some of the people who inherited the global lingua franca from 300 years ago were expelled from the giant wall. A group of people who communicated in a new language were living inside the wall. If the barbarians outside the giant wall were a part of the survivors who were expelled from the giant wall, then the people inside the wall, as the winners, didn't need to change their language and use a new language. Dean frowned as he couldn't figure it out. Perhaps the answer could only be found in the history books of the barbarians. He hoped that they had preserved this thing. Despicable people inside the wall. Yvette spat out a mouthful of saliva as she saw Dean's face. Dean indifferently glanced at the saliva on Dean's face. He raised his hand and gently wiped it. He pinched her jaw and opened her mouth. Then he opened his mouth and spat a mouthful of saliva into her mouth. At the same time, he pinched her throat. She swallowed the saliva. He let go of his hand and quietly looked at her. Do you still want to vomit? Yvette looked at Dean. She couldn't believe her eyes. The despicable person inside the wall spat in her mouth. She had a disgusting feeling like she had swallowed horse dung. Her face changed. She desperately coughed and spat out the saliva in her mouth. She looked at Dean and roared, I'm going to kill you, you bastard. Fuck. Reed and others heard the words of the female barbarian. They looked back and saw Dean squatting in front of the female barbarian. The latter didn't pose any danger to Dean. They turned their heads and continued to do their own things. F***CK. Dean heard her cursing in English, but his face was indifferent. He lowered his voice and said in English, If you want to live, then be honest with me. If you provoke me, although I won't kill you, but I guarantee that you will lose some organs that you care about. Yvette was startled as if she was struck by lightning. She almost suspected that there was a problem with her ears. The despicable person inside the wall spoke in the king's language. Did he understand the king's language? Her eyes widened as she looked at Dean. The young barbarian who was tied to the ground was also confused. Although he didn't understand what Dean was saying, but he was familiar with the wording of the language. It was the great king's language. You. Yvette's mouth was slightly open. Her brain couldn't recover. There was a trace of sadness in Dean's eyes as he saw her shocked expression. He could speak English, but he didn't learn it from the super chip. After all, time was limited. It was impossible for him to learn the old language. The reason why he knew English was because he had been abroad when he was a child. To be precise, he was born in the American Empire. In China at that time, people who had a little money and conditions liked to go abroad to give birth to children. Compared to the domestic medical conditions, they trusted the foreign hospitals more. This was a kind of disease. His family was no exception. His parents were researchers. Although they weren't rich, but they had no problem to go abroad to give birth. That's why he was born in a hospital in the United States. He lived in the United States until the age of 5 before returning to his motherland. He learned English from an early age. As long as you cooperate with me, I can save your life. Dean continued to speak in English. Yvette gradually recovered, but still looked at the boy in shock. She couldn't believe that the royal language was mastered by the people inside the wall. Even the members of the royal family were extremely difficult to learn this language. Especially in her opinion, it was even more difficult than hunting a few ferocious beasts. But a boy who was a few years younger than her was able to speak so fluently. It was incredible. Who are you? Yvette couldn't help but ask. Dean frowned. It doesn't matter who I am. The question is whether you want to live or not. Of course, Yvette replied without hesitation. Then we will cooperate. Dean stared at her. Chapter 391. A living person is always more valuable than a dead person. Dudeen slowly said. As the first deposit of the cooperation, you have to tell me first. Is there a force behind your attack? Yvette didn't answer. Since it is a cooperation, then why should I pay the deposit in advance? You should exchange with me. It is fair. I'm sorry, but there is no fairness here. Yvette's eyes turned slightly. If I tell you, can you tell me why you can understand our language? She asked. If I tell you, can you tell me why you know our language? It depends on my mood. Dudeen indifferently replied. Yvette looked at him deeply and whispered. Okay, I can tell you, but I hope you can release me. I don't want to know why you know our language. Dudeen gently frowned. You don't seem to understand. I'm not talking about conditions with you. Do you want to be imprisoned so that you can feel the atmosphere of the interrogation? Yvette's face changed. Her eyes were filled with anger, but she quickly suppressed it. As far as I know, there is more than one person inside the wall who has made a deal with us. Even if I tell you, it will be useless. There is someone inside the wall who has made a deal with us. As long as we capture the outer wall, then they will promise that person to be the commander of the military. In addition to your military headquarters, there is another force that calls itself Holy Church. They are also cooperating with us and selling our armors secretly. In addition, there are 2 consortiums that are also willing to provide us with material support and information transmission within the wall. What do you think? What can you do now that you know about it? Ha 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 ha. Yvette couldn't help but sneer. Her laughter attracted the attention of Reed and others. Dudeen slapped her in the face. Yvette's laughter stopped. Her eyes widened as she stared at Dudeen. Reed and others shook their heads as they saw Dudeen slap. They turned their heads and continued to do their own things. Dudeen narrowed his eyes as he looked down at the female barbarian. If you like to laugh, then I will make you cry. The anger in Yvette's heart seemed to be choked by an invisible hand as she looked at Dudeen's dark eyes. She angrily lowered her head as she stared at the sand on the ground. Her white and sharp teeth were tightly clenched as she tried to endure. It doesn't matter if what you said is true or false. Can you tell me the names of these people? Dudeen's voice was calm, as if nothing had happened. Yvette replied in a low voice. How would I know? I'm just a small minion. How can I get access to these secrets? You're not a small minion, but the royal family of the barbarians. Dudeen indifferently said. Can't you be special? Why do you have to confess all the secrets after torture? Isn't that too boring? You. Yvette angrily stared at Dudian. What do you want? I've told you everything I know. What else do you want me to do? She glared at Dudian as she spoke. Who would have thought that the teenager in front of her would turn his head and speak a long string of words in the wall's language? Does anyone know what she is saying? Dudian turned his head and asked. Reed took a deep breath and smiled. Master, this is the language of the barbarian royal family. It is said that it is very mysterious and difficult to learn. Our military has been trying to master this language, but we haven't been able to do so. Yes, only these primitive barbarians can understand this language. The others chimed in. Listening to her tone, it seems that she is very angry. Could she understand our language? Dudian asked. Reed shook his head. I don't think so. Master, you have to be careful not to let her bite you. All right. Dudian helplessly looked back. He looked at Yvette, who was glaring at him. They told me to be careful not to let you bite me. Will you bite? Yvette's lungs were about to explode as she heard his words. She would rather be killed than humiliated. Although the boy hadn't abused her since she was captured, but his words had made her mad several times. One day, I will bite you to death. Yvette clenched her teeth in anger. Dudian nodded. So in order to nip it in the bud, should I pull out your teeth first? Yvette pursed her lips as she stared at Dudian with a trace of tension and anger. Dudian indifferently said, Tell me the names of these people. Yvette was relieved when she saw that Dean didn't take action. For barbarians, tooth extraction was not only painful, but also a shame. Her eyes flashed. I only know that there is someone called Knorch. I don't know the rest. What I said is true. It's useless even if you interrogate me. Dudian nodded and touched her head. Good girl. Although what you said has no effect on me, because I won't believe it. But I can see that there are things that you are afraid of. Yvette looked up at Dudian. What do you mean? Literal meaning. Why are you asking me if you don't believe me? Yvette felt that her anger was provoked again. She suppressed the impulse to roar. You're the enemy. If I listened to the enemy's words to deal with my own people, that would be stupid. What if the information you reported was fake and there was a real traitor hiding in the shadows? Wouldn't I become your helper instead? Dudian indifferently said. As for why I asked you, it's very simple. I just want to tease you. Tease me? Yvette felt as if she had been struck by lightning. Dudian's mouth curved into an imperceptible arc. He stood up and no longer paid attention to her. He turned to look at the canyon and prepared for the next battle. It didn't take long for the corpses of the giant wolf cavalry to be cleaned up and piled up together as sandbags. As for the corpses of the dead soldiers, they were dragged back by Reed and others and buried at the edge of the canyon. Vibrations came from outside the canyon in less than an hour. Dudian, Reed, and others were ready. Soon, a group of barbarians riding porcupines rushed out of the canyon. The barbarians noticed Dudian and others at the mouth of the canyon from a distance. They were familiar with the smell of blood in the air. It was the smell of the elite royal guards. The barbarians saw the corpses of the battle wolf cavalry as they got closer. There was no doubt that the royal family was killed here. After their brains reacted to this signal, all of the savages instantly went crazy, roaring and attacking without any regard for their lives. Dudian stood in the middle of the canyon. The arrows swept out like black light as the barbarians entered the firing range. Puff! The throat of the leader of the barbarians was pierced through. The three archers who were on both sides of the canyon were shocked as they saw the situation in front of them. They didn't expect Dudian's range to be so far and so accurate. At this moment, the barbarian team rushed over. The three archers quickly aimed and shot. Puff! Some of the arrows missed and some hit the target. Whoosh! In this arrow, another extremely light and sharp whistling sound rang out. A black light swept out, and with a pu sound, it pierced through a savage's throat. The arrow swept out from the back of his neck and shot into the chest of another savage behind, penetrating his armor and injuring him. Dean's expression was as cold as frost. He quickly pulled out the arrow, aimed and shot. The whole process was extremely coherent. He shot the second arrow in less than a second. although it couldn't be compared to continuous arrows, but each arrow would take the life of a barbarian. More than a dozen barbarians were killed by the time the barbarians reached the front of the barrier. There were only 7 or 8 people left in the back. Chapter 392. The barbarian army fell in front of the barrier after a few minutes. More than 80% of the barbarians and their mounts were killed by Dean's arrows. The rest of the barbarians were killed by Reed and others. They were outnumbered, but won a great victory. While the crowd rejoiced, they looked at the young man with the bow in the middle of the canyon with even more awe. Whether it was the barrier he built with the corpses of his enemies or the power of his arrows, everyone admired him. The young man was not only a noble magic master, but also a combat genius. Dean asked the 3 archers to give him their spare quiver after the end of the battle. All 3 of them readily agreed and handed it to Dean without any explanation. Take a rest and pick up the weapons of the barbarians. We have to hold on for a long time. Dean ordered as he sat down in front of the 2 barbarian captives. Reed took out his drinking water and handed it to Dean. Master, take a rest. Dean glanced at him. If you want me to live longer, then don't come close to me and don't give me food. Reed was startled as he thought of the previous assassination attempt. He sighed and took back the water. Master, I'm really sorry about this. It's all in the past. It's not your responsibility, so don't mess around. Dean took out his own water and drank it. If there's nothing else, then go and help clean up the corpses and the battlefield. I don't need anyone to accompany me. Reed smiled bitterly and turned away. The night was as cold as water. Half an hour after the end of the battle, another team of barbarians appeared outside the canyon. The battle started again. This time they relied on the corpses and Dean's arrows to win the battle with 0 casualties. A short night passed. Dean and others were exhausted. They had encountered 4 battles in succession. Although the duration of each battle wasn't long, but it still exhausted everyone's strength. The sky had just turned bright when it started to rain heavily. The bad weather made Reed and the others curse unceasingly. They prayed to the god of light to stop the rain. Dean put on a raincoat and sat in front of the 2 captives. He quietly watched the rain. Yvette and the other savage young man were tied up and lying on the ground. Their armors were quickly soaked by the rain. Their hair was wet and stuck to their faces, and the mud splashed from the ground was all over their bodies. If it was just the rain, Yvette could still accept it. She was not a delicate lady inside the wall. But what annoyed her the most was that when it rained, the demon boy next to her was humming a strange song from time to time. He looked very leisurely and didn't mean to shelter them from the rain. Every time the mud on the ground splashed on her nostrils and lips, the anger in her heart burned even more. Dean hummed for a moment. He curiously looked at the female barbarian. Do you barbarians have a birthday custom?
Yvette licked the muddy water on her mouth and spat it out. She said coldly, "Yes, what's wrong?" "Nothing. When is your birthday?" Dean asked, "What does this have to do with you?" Just casually asking. Yvette was so angry that she rolled her eyes, but the muddy water in front of her splashed into her eyes. She suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. She wanted to reach out and rub her eyes, but her arms were too weak. She could only squeeze her eyes out with her eyelids. Dean quietly looked at her for a moment. His fingers gently swept across her eyes and wiped the muddy water from the corner of her eyes. He looked up at the hazy rain in the distance. There was a trace of sadness in his eyes. He gently hummed the ballad that his sister once sang. 300 years. The language was still there, but the people were gone. In the vast land, he was the only one fighting alone. The sky and the land were no longer familiar to him. This person, this thing, all of them were enemies. He slowly hummed through his nose and gradually became silent, feeling the mud in her eyes being wiped away. Yvette couldn't help but be startled. She looked up and the anger in her eyes was gradually replaced by surprise, as if she had seen something incredible. She stared blankly for a long time. When she heard the strange voice stop, she couldn't help but ask, "What are you humming? Is this the music of the people inside the wall?" Dean turned to look at her. Music doesn't distinguish between national boundaries or types. Yvette was stunned. At this moment, She had an illusion that the boy who exuded a dark and evil temperament a moment ago had turned into a warm and kind beam of sunshine in the blink of an eye. This completely opposite change made her startle for a moment, but she quickly reacted and looked at him suspiciously. She lowered her head and said nothing more, thinking that the boy must be deliberately teasing her again. She decided to ignore him. The rain didn't stop. There were traces of barbarians outside the canyon. Dean grabbed his bow and ordered everyone prepare for the battle. After a night of fierce battle, he had become the leader of the team. No one felt that there was anything wrong with his orders. The battle soon ended. The blood was washed away by the rain, and the rain stopped. They won with 0 casualties. Shortly after the end of the battle, a cavalry came from the rear. It was the young archer who had left earlier. He saw Dean and others were still standing at the entrance of the canyon. He was relieved. He quickly jumped off the horse and said to Dean, "Greetings, Master. Military reinforcements will arrive soon." Reed and the others were relieved as they heard this. They smiled. Dean nodded and turned to the crowd. "Everyone pack up and prepare for the handover. We will escort the 2 captives back for interrogation. We will try to interrogate them as soon as possible."
In the continuous battles in Scarlet Canyon, he had killed hundreds of barbarians and captured a royal barbarian. These 2 meritorious deeds were enough for him to become a knight. The rest could be handed over to the military. Yes, everyone replied. Dean came to the front of the 2 barbarian captives and whispered to the female barbarian, "We will take you back to the military for interrogation. There will be all kinds of torture to make you confess. I have said before that you have to cooperate with me if you want to live. You only need to confess about the Melon Consortium. If they ask who is the mastermind of the Melon Consortium, then you will say Mr. Mark, Mr. Rudolph, and another person called Sarah Mel." Yvette was startled as she looked at Dean. "These people are your enemies. Do you want to use my mouth to attack them? Aren't you afraid that I will confess?" Dean stretched out his hand to hold her cheek. This slight action made Yvette's pupils shrink. Her hair stood up as she instinctively tightened her cheeks. Dean raised his palm, but this time it wasn't fast. He gently touched her cheek. "How could I let you go back alive if I didn't expect this? It's useless for you to confess to me, because your companion has already confessed to me once. But no one believes it, so you have to be obedient. No one likes disobedient pets. Do you understand?" "Pet." Yvette stared at Dean in anger as she heard the word. Dean smiled and touched the corner of her eyes. "Your eyes are very beautiful." When Yvette heard these soft words, she felt a chill in her heart, as if she was bitten by a poisonous snake. She hurriedly lowered her head and gritted her teeth. After a moment, she said, "I promise you, but you must guarantee my safety." Dean smiled. "You won't die as long as you are obedient, but it is inevitable that you will suffer." After saying that, he stood up. Seeing that the others were almost done packing up, he asked the young archer, "Where's the army? Are they not here yet?" Chapter 393. Not long after, a team of cavalry suddenly appeared from behind the canyon, followed by infantry and archers. They came along the narrow road and stopped 7 or 8 meters in front of Dean. A general riding a brown horse quickly jumped down from the horse and rushed to the front of Dean. He nervously asked, "Master, are you okay?" Dean shook his head. "It's not a big deal." The middle-aged general was relieved as he looked at the wound on Dean's left hand. "I've heard that someone in the escort team was bribed to assassinate you. Fortunately, you responded in time and didn't let the thieves succeed. It's the negligence of the military. I hope Master can forgive us. How about you go back and recuperate first?" Dean smiled. The general was not a simple character. He casually said a few words, and the charge of the assassination was placed outside of the military. It was only a crime of negligence. Sure enough, he knew how to exonerate the charge of a crime better than anyone else. "I'll leave this place to the general. I'll personally take the 2 captives back to the military," Dean said to the middle-aged general as he pointed at the 2 captives on the ground. The middle-aged general looked at them and said, "Master, you've worked hard. Leave this small matter to us. This canyon is a dangerous place. You will stay here and guard it." Dean didn't care about the age gap between them. He gently patted the general's shoulder and said in a sincere tone. The middle-aged general stared blankly, feeling a little strange. He was actually being taught by a youth. However, he didn't say anything as he thought of Dean's identity as a master. Dean picked up the female barbarian from the ground and threw her on the back of his horse. He looked at Reed. Why don't you stay here and count the number of enemies' corpses so that you can report to the general? Reed was happy. Yes. He knew that Dean deliberately said this to the middle-aged general. He wanted to give him a chance to make meritorious deeds. It wasn't just to protect the safety of the master. The middle-aged general nodded as he didn't care. How many barbarians could they kill with just 20 people? He also understood that Dean wanted to go to the battlefield to make meritorious deeds. Otherwise, people would think that he was just putting on a show. Hiya! Dean galloped out. Reed and others saluted the middle-aged general. They carried the remaining barbarian youth and left behind Dean. Only one person was responsible for counting the number of dead barbarians. You only need to confess about the Melon Consortium and the Scott Consortium. Do you understand? Dean lowered his voice and said to the female barbarian who was lying on the horse. Yvette was violently jolted by the horse. Her chest was stuffy and she couldn't breathe. She clenched her teeth and secretly cursed Dean, but she didn't dare to show it on the surface. Did you hear me? Dean leaned closer. Yvette gritted her teeth and said, I will do as you say, but if you don't save me, I will definitely confess to you. You don't even know my name. How are you going to confess to me? Dean said indifferently. He shook the rope and rushed forward faster. Yvette almost spat out blood when she heard Dean's words. Dean and others reached the military headquarters after more than 2 hours of galloping. Dean dismounted and pulled down the female barbarian. He handed her to a general from the military. This is the barbarian we captured when we were defending the Scarlet Canyon. I heard from Reed that she seems to be a barbarian royal. I hope you can interrogate her and get some important information. The general had 3 golden stars and was over 50 years old. The last time Skagen came to the command hall to show the new legendary invention, he was also present. He knew that the fierce killing weapon came from the hands of the young man in front of him. At this moment, he saw the young man face to face for the first time. There was a very close feeling. There was a trace of shock in the general's eyes as he heard Dean's words. He looked at the female barbarian in Dean's hand. He took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. Master Dean is really wise and brave. He is not only an outstanding master of the temple, but also a glorious knight. I'm ashamed to get such a result in the first battle. Don't worry, the military will deal with this matter properly. We will pry out everything from her mouth. Dean said, General, this person is still useful to me. I hope you can spare her life after you are done with her. Spare her life? The general looked at Dean in surprise. Master, why? I want to dissect and see the difference between the corpses of the barbarian royal family and the ordinary barbarians. Perhaps I can infer the living environment of the barbarian royal family or the overall number of barbarians. I can even exterminate the barbarian royal family. Dean said. The general and Reed were stunned. After a moment, the general couldn't help but ask, Master, can you really do this? Dean shook his head. Of course I can't guarantee 100% success. No master can guarantee this, but there is some possibility. So I hope the military can spare her life. Leave her to me after the interrogation. The general was a little disappointed, but then he smiled and said, Since the master has spoken, then I will make the decision. After the interrogation is over, I will send it to the master. I wish the master a smooth progress in your research. If you can help the military to wipe out the barbarians outside the Great Wall, the master will be a hero that will be remembered through the ages. You will be the greatest knight in the Hall of Knights. Dean smiled and sneered in his heart. Dean wanted to separate from Reed and others and go back to their homes. But Reed and others insisted on following him. They said that the war wasn't over, so the task of protecting him wouldn't end. They had to stay by his side to protect him. Dean didn't insist on ordering them to retreat. Anyway, it was convenient to have more people to run errands. As for the friendship of the soldiers, it was good that others had this thing. He felt that he could make use of it. Dean replaced the gauze again after returning to the castle. Reed wanted to inform the top doctors of the military to treat Dean, but Dean refused. There were two main reasons for Dean's refusal. The first was that he didn't want his physical condition to be known by the military. The second was that the Melon Consortium and other unknown enemies had infiltrated the military. He couldn't guarantee that the military doctor wouldn't be sent to assassinate him. If the treatment was tampered with, then he wouldn't be able to detect it and would die in vain. Master, Noyce brought the hot soup to the study room. He looked at the black gauze. Master, are you okay? Has the poison been cleared? It's much better. Dean put on clean clothes and took the hot soup. He was about to take a sip when he thought of something. He opened the drawer and took out a silver coin. He wiped it and threw it into the bowl. Noyce was at a loss. Dean stared at the coin for a moment, but didn't see any change. He was relieved. He was about to drink, but saw a touch of black on the edge of the coin. His face changed as he stared at Noyce. Noyce couldn't help but say, Master. Dean looked at him for a moment and slowly said, Catch the person who made the soup and ask him why he poisoned the soup. Poisoned? Noyce was shocked. He realized the seriousness of the matter as he looked at Dean's gloomy expression. He turned and ran away. Chapter 394. After a moment, Noyce went upstairs and looked at Dadian. Master, someone has died. The chef who made the soup for you committed suicide by poison in the kitchen. Poison? Dadian was surprised as he saw Noyce go upstairs alone. He narrowed his eyes, investigate his identity and the people he has been in contact with. His family, his relatives, and so on. Yes. Noyce turned away. Dean looked at the hot soup on the desk. His eyes were cold. He didn't expect that the Melon Consortium would provoke other forces before he could eradicate them. Moreover, the other forces were much stronger than the Melon Consortium. Among the 6 consortia, only the Scott Consortium had such information. However, the Scott Consortium had no reason to deal with him. If it wasn't the Scott Consortium, then it could be the Dark Church or the military. If one were to weigh the pros and cons, then the biggest suspect would be the Dark Church. Could it be that he had provoked the Dark Church by creating a new legendary divine incantation? The people who were sent to the military to assassinate me weren't from the same group. They didn't cooperate with each other. They should be sent by 2 parties. One of them is most likely the Melon Consortium, but the other one is likely to be the one who poisoned me. Dean's eyes flashed as his heart turned cold. The enemy was in the dark while he was in the light. It was impossible to prevent an assassination. Even if his physique was several times stronger, he would die immediately if he took some highly toxic drugs. Moreover, according to his understanding in the temple, many highly toxic drugs didn't even have an odor. Moreover, it was difficult to detect them using ordinary methods. The so-called assassination was to use the strength of a strand of hair to kill a person as strong as a bull. This was the charm of assassination. He once used assassination to kill Deacon Huey, but he didn't expect to become someone else's prey. In this hunting jungle, I want to see who is the king. Dean slightly rubbed his fingers. A trace of deep cold light flashed in his eyes. The heavy rain was falling outside the window. The heat from the hot soup was visible to the naked eye. After bandaging his left hand, Dean got up and went downstairs. He went to the kitchen and drove out all the cooks. He personally picked some fresh ingredients, washed them, and cooked a bowl of hot soup for himself as today's breakfast. After the hot soup was cooked, Dean put it on the table. He enjoyed it while reading the military morning newspaper that had just been sent to him. Auburn died at the Golden Wall. Where's the safe place for the barbarians to break out? The military will build a second line of defense behind the Red River to annihilate the barbarians in one fell swoop. Master Dean personally led 20 elite soldiers to guard the Scarlet Grand Canyon. They fought all night and killed 281 barbarian cavalrymen. They were 10 times the number of barbarian cavalrymen. According to several soldiers, they were able to defeat the barbarians because of Master Dean's archery. It is reported that Mr. Dean is not only the youngest master of the temple, but also a double legendary master. In addition, he is a qualified knight. His identity as a knight has been recognized by the Knight's Hall. The following is an interview with Master Luke from the Knight's Hall. The youngest master in history, Dean, has captured the barbarian royal family. He is currently being interrogated in the military torture room. Duddian glanced at the newspapers from the consortia. News about him occupied nearly half of the pages, especially the news about the capture of the barbarian royal family. All the newspapers looked strange. In addition to the news about the front line, it seemed that he was the only person who appeared in the news as an individual. Moreover, he occupied nearly half of the pages. The name of Master is really useful. Duddian smiled as he put away the newspapers. Master, are you going to battlefield? Nicholas carefully asked Duddian. Duddian took a sip of the hot soup. Of course. Next time, I will follow my new invention to end the war. But before that, I will bury the Melon Consortium. It's a bit an eyesore. Melon Consortium? Nicholas was startled. Duddian looked at him. What about Patriarch Feline? Oh, Patriarch Feline went back to the Rhine Castle. The Melon family didn't care about the previous debt and gave the castle to Patriarch Feline. Nicholas replied. Duddian nodded. Write a letter to inform Patriarch Feline. Tell him to bring back his family and servants. I know. In addition, we don't need too many servants. Recruit a few new ones. Don't spread the news about this morning's matter. Nicholas knew that Duddian was talking about the previous poisoning incident. His face slightly changed. Master, this matter has absolutely nothing to do with me. Dean glanced at him. I know it has nothing to do with you. If you do well in the future, I won't doubt you. But if you make a mistake, you won't be pardoned. Nicholas secretly looked at Duddian. He was relieved as he saw that Duddian didn't speak. Master, I will never be stupid again. Duddian waved his hand to let him withdraw. Duddian called Crone after Nicotine left. Write a letter to old Feline and ask him to use my name to get Gwyneth and Sergei back from the military. Remember to use my name and the identity of the consortium to get them back. I'm not the one who wants them back. I know, Master. Crone replied. Duddian took a moment to rest. He called Reed, who was on duty outside. Colonel, can you send a few people to help me with something? Reed was surprised. Master, please speak. Send a few skilled soldiers to the civilian area to pick up a few people. Duddian said. Civilian area? Reed's eyes flashed as he saw Dean's hair color. Is it Master's relative? I'll take care of this matter. I'll pick them up before the barbarians break into the civilian area. Well, be quick. Duddian nodded as he wrote down the identity information of Jura and Gwyneth. If they want to bring other people, but the number is small, then it's up to them. Yes. Reed nodded. Chapter 395. Mark looked at the secret letter in his hand. His shadow had been his personal attendant for many years. How could he fail in such an assassination? This was simply incredible. He was very clear about the strength of the shadow. Even the two senior hunters in the consortium couldn't defeat the shadow. Even the shadow assassin Glenn, who was good at assassination, couldn't break through the shadow's defense and hurt him. The shadow was not only good at defense, but it was also good at assassination. However, it failed to assassinate an intermediate hunter's oracle. His face was gloomy as he held the secret letter and turned away. He came to another luxurious and spacious office. There was a magnificent oil painting on the top of the office. There was a white-haired old man standing under it. The old man's hair was white, but his posture was straight. He was the patriarch of the Mel family, George, who had once led the Mel family to take root in the commercial district. Father. Mark bowed his head. George slowly turned around and glanced at him. He saw the secret letter in his father's hand. His brows slightly wrinkled. What's wrong? Was there an accident in the assassination? Father, the assassination failed. Mark said in a low voice. George slightly frowned as he slowly sat down on the chair. What about the shadow? He is dead. Dead? George seemed relieved. It's good that he wasn't caught alive. Mark sighed. The shadow won't betray us, even if he was caught alive. After all, he has been with our family for so many years. He knows the rules of the army. George slightly shook his head. Anyway, the dead are always more honest than the living. Even if he were to assassinate a senior hunter, he would have a great chance. It seems that the army has sent a very powerful expert to protect that kid. Anyway, the shadow is one of the guards. The army can only eat the scapegoat. Mark sighed. I didn't expect the kid to be so lucky. It's a pity for the shadow. I thought that he would be able to escape after the assassination. He has been hiding by my side, and no one knows about it. Even if he assassinated the kid and exposed his identity, he can still return to my side in the future. People will eventually pass away. George looked at him meaningfully. Since the shadow assassination failed, we should use other methods. Perhaps we should contact the Dark Church and ask them to act for us. As long as they give us money, these lunatics would do anything. I don't believe that this little devil can stop the hungry beasts of the Dark Church. Mark nodded and turned away. A gleam flashed across George's eyes as he watched him leave. He muttered to himself, "Military, since you've protected him so diligently, let's see how you're going to clear your name now." The Shadow Clone was once one of your secret trump cards. Investigate him properly. Military headquarters in the north of the commercial district. The news that Dean was assassinated by a member of the escort team spread to the top of the military after Dean returned. All the generals and colonels who heard the news were alarmed. They were scared and broke into a cold sweat. They were relieved when they learned that Dean was only injured. There was some palpitation and fear in their hearts. If Dean was really assassinated by the escort team, then it would be a devastating blow to the military. Whether it was the anger of the people or the hatred of the Holy Church, the military would be in a state of subversion. Lorenzo jumped up from his chair the moment he heard the news. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. After hearing that the assassination had failed, his tightened heart slightly relaxed. He suddenly realized that this matter was too simple. He secretly rejoiced that God had given him a chance to correct his mistake. Send 300 purple feather soldiers to Master Dean's castle to protect him for 24 hours. Listen to Master Dean's command, but don't let them leave Master Dean's side. Lorenzo ordered. He thought of something. Inform the 3 Gopher brothers. Let them go and protect Master Dean's life. Yes. The messenger turned and ran away. A 2-star general got up. General, the 3 Gopher brothers have been your personal attendants for many years. If you send them to protect Master Dean, then your safety will be, I'll stay in the barracks and won't go anywhere. It will be very difficult for the Dark Church to assassinate me. Lorenzo said in a deep voice, if Mr. Dean dies in this time of war, especially if he is under the protection of the military, then the military will be overthrown even if we win the war. These consortiums are not sheep, but wolves. The 2-star general's face changed as he sat down. Check it for me. Lorenzo put his hand on the table as he looked at everyone. I want to know in 10 minutes whether the 2 assassins are from our military or not. I want to know their identities as well as the people related to them. Find out all of them for me. This assassination isn't just aimed at Master Dean. I suspect that the real target is the military. They want to intensify the conflict between the military and the Holy Church. In addition to the Dark Church, I want to see if there are other dirty people in disguise. General, the identity of the 2 assassins has been found out. An officer next to him said, they are from our military headquarters. One of them is a soldier called Port Allen, an honorable soldier who has made many meritorious deeds and won many awards. The other one is slightly older, called North Sundran. We checked his information and found that he is a retired soldier. He used to be a member of our military's Magic Blade. Later, he offended a noble in the commercial district during an operation to arrest a foreign army and was expelled from the Magic Blade army. Since then, he has disappeared without a trace. The generals looked at each other as they heard the report. Lorenzo's face was gloomy as he said, immediately go and find out who placed these 2 in the escort team. It was arranged by General Coso. General Coso has gone to the front line and is currently informing him to come back. Lorenzo looked at the officer and said, who was the noble that this person offended before? It is a family called Padstow. This family is one of the shareholders of the Melon Consortium, but they don't have a high authority in the consortium. The officer said, however, The family declared bankruptcy after North Sendrin was expelled from the Magic Knife Army. They moved out of the commercial district and moved to the civilian district. Lorenzo's eyes lit up. Send someone to find out why they went bankrupt. Yes, the officer replied. Damn, one is a retired soldier and the other is a soldier. Lorenzo clenched his fists as his eyes swept over the crowd. Who can tell me how to explain this to the Holy Church? The generals were silent as they bowed their heads. General, an officer ran into the hall and reported. The royal barbarian, who is escorted by Master Dean, has confessed the attack route of the barbarians. At the same time, she also confessed the names of the people who cooperated with them. Oh, Lorenzo's eyes flashed, and he said, Tell me, who are they? Yes. The officer opened the interrogation notebook. They are Mark, Rudolph, Saramel, Chaste, Barandi. Chapter 396. Master, do you want me to ask the doctor to check your arm? Crone looked at Dean's bandaged left arm and asked in a worried tone. Dean shook his head. It's not the same as before. It's inconvenient for outsiders to know about my physical condition. It's a pity that we don't have a trustworthy doctor around us. We can only lick our wounds by ourselves. Crone thought for a moment. Master, we can ask a doctor to come over and wait for him to finish his diagnosis. Then we can kill him in secret. Dean turned to look at him. He nodded. That's a good idea, but it's not worth it to kill a person. Crone was surprised in his heart. Previously, when Gwyneth wanted to save the civilians in the towns outside the Golden Wall, Dean had reluctantly agreed. He didn't expect that at this moment he would think about a doctor. Crone felt that he couldn't understand the teenager who came out of the orphanage with him. He couldn't figure out Dean's thoughts. Dean looked out of the window at the drizzle. After a long time, he seemed to be talking to himself. How long has this rain been? Crone bowed his head. Master, today is the 6th day. Is it? Dean murmured. It seems that this year's monsoon rain is much longer than the past. Yes. Dean was silent for a moment. He sighed and said, No matter how heavy the rain is, it will eventually stop, right? Yes, Master. The new morning papers were spread to all regions. Rudolph was sitting in his spacious office reading today's morning papers. His eyelids had been twitching since he woke up in the morning. He had a hunch that something big was going to happen today. When he finished reading the newspapers from the military ministry, the Divine Hall, and various consortiums, his face became even gloomier. He threw the newspaper on the table and felt an unprecedented fatigue. He rubbed his face with both hands, and his thick black eyebrows were deformed. He took a deep breath and exhaled forcefully. He turned to the butler beside him and said slowly, Tell me, did I do something wrong? The butler was startled. He carefully asked, Master, what do you mean? Rudolph looked at him, but seemed to be thinking about other things. Was I wrong to stop this boy from dating He didn't expect that the master would mention this matter at this critical time. But he thought of the news in the newspaper and felt relieved. He replied, Master, you were just doing your duty as a father. The young master was just a small hunter. Moreover, he was a nobody in the civilian district. He had no name and no background. Anyone would have done the same thing. He can only blame himself for overestimating himself. If he is sensible, he should have taken the initiative to give up and wait for his achievements to be together with the young miss. Only then can he protect his feelings. Rudolph was silent for a moment. But I've read countless people in my life. But I didn't pay attention to the person my daughter likes. If I had more contact with him, then maybe I would have been able to see that he is extraordinary. After all, the light of a genius can't be covered. The butler was startled and didn't know what to say. Every business needs to be carefully observed in combination with the market, general trends, materials, and other aspects. Rudolph said to himself, I have been in business all my life. I have followed the principle of observation, understanding, and implementation. However, I messed up this business deal. If I had given this young man some tests and made some requests, perhaps he would have shown me his potential back then. The steward sighed in his heart when he saw the depressed look on his master's face. He said, Master, you can't be blamed for this. Anyone would have done the same. No matter how hard a black-haired peasant tries, he can never become a noble. He can only blame himself for not showing his talent in magic. Rudolph shook his head. Hair color and identity are just external packaging of a commodity. We do business to dig out the value of something that others think is worthless and make huge profits. If everyone thinks that it is valuable, then it won't be able to sell it. But I made a mistake in this matter. I was blinded by the rough and humble appearance. I didn't see that it was wrapped in gold. The butler tried to comfort him. Master, it's useless to talk about these things. Even without him, our family will still prosper. We will still step into the inner wall, and your long-cherished wish will come true. Rudolph's mouth twitched. You don't understand. You don't understand. The Melon Consortium is finished. Do you know why I withdrew the funds from the consortium and sold the shares? It's because I know that the Melon Consortium and I have provoked a person that we shouldn't have provoked. But I didn't think that this person would grow so fast and terrifying. What? The butler was stunned as he didn't respond. Master, Melon Consortium is finished? How is it possible? Even if this person has become a master, he can't do anything to the Melon Consortium. When he escaped from prison, I thought it was just the negligence of Thornflower Prison. But look at the changes in the entire commercial district in just 1 year after his escape. We went to various places and heard the most common words. Yes, they're all about him. A year ago, he was still a prisoner. Now, he's the ideal lover in the eyes of all the noble ladies. He's the son-in-law that all the families want the most. When this war ends, he'll become the hero of all the commoners. Do you think that all this is just a coincidence? No, this isn't something that an average person can do. Most people don't have the courage to murder a deacon of the magistrate. He is a madman and an extremely terrifying mad genius. The butler was startled as he listened to Rudolph's words. At this time, a maid ran in. Master, there is a general who wants to see you. We couldn't stop him. He is waiting for you in the hall. Rudolph sighed as he thought of something. He got up and straightened his necktie. The bitterness on his face was swept away. It seemed that in the blink of an eye he was back to the tycoon of the business world. Go and entertain him. I'll be right there. Yes. The maid retreated. Master, is the military looking for you to discuss business with our consortium? The butler asked curiously as he handed the coat to Rudolph. Rudolph indifferently replied. There is no need for the general to come out to discuss business. Meanwhile, George and Mark were discussing something in the Mel family. Suddenly, a butler ran in. Master, young master, there is a general who wants to see you. He is waiting for you in the hall. It seems that he has come with ill intentions. Oh, Mark frowned. I know. You go first. We will be right there. Yes. Mark looked at his father after the butler left. Father, the military sent a general. Is it because the assassination was exposed? It shouldn't be. Even if they check all the information about the shadow, they won't be able to find us. I have already prepared for this. Let's go and see. George got up and said. They went out of the office and went to the hall downstairs. General Casey, what brings you here today? Mark saw a middle-aged general waiting in the hall. He laughed as he walked down the stairs to greet him. Chapter 397. Arrest Warrant? Mark's eyes swept over the book. The thick black characters were engraved into his pupils. His smile couldn't help but stiffen. The servants around the hall were shocked when they heard the words of the middle-aged general. They couldn't help but turn their heads to look at him. General Casey? George slowly walked out from behind Mark with his walking stick. His figure was thin because of his old age. He couldn't see Mark's figure when he was standing behind Mark. But Mark quickly moved sideways as he walked out. He bent down to support George. All the attention and lights in the hall were focused on him at this moment. It seems that I need to talk about etiquette and history with the general. George calmly looked at the middle-aged General Casey and slowly said, Bringing weapons and trespassing into a noble's manor is a very impolite thing to do, and it is also unforgivable. Although our Mel family treats people generously, but we can't forgive such rude behavior. Secondly, since the end of the Battle of the Garden 160 years ago, The military can't arrest any aristocrat for any crime except for the rebellion of the aristocrats. It doesn't matter if the aristocrats are declining or rising. The crutches in his hand fiercely hit the ground after he said the last word. Although his expression was calm, but his sharp words showed his anger and majesty. Casey indifferently looked at the old man who was once all-powerful. Countless high-ranking generals, knights of light, and even deacons of the magistrate bowed and respectfully treated him. The latter's dignified and deep eyes made Casey's expression become colder and colder. His voice was as hard as a stone. "I'm sorry, I'm acting under orders. The arrest warrant is for the crime of rebellion. In addition, your granddaughter Saramel will also come with us. I hope you have the manners of a noble and won't embarrass us." "Shut up. What are you talking about?" Mark angrily rebuked. Casey tilted his head and looked at him. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. "Mr. Kinson, you want to arrest me?" "You—" Mark's eyebrows were raised. George raised his hand to press down the hand on his arm. He shook his head slightly and looked deeply into Casey's eyes. He said slowly, "I hope the military can take responsibility for your reckless actions. Let's go." He patted the back of Mark's hand. He turned around and walked toward the outside of the hall. His old figure didn't look weak at all. Instead, he exuded a majestic aura like that of a dragon. Mark was startled. He turned his head and coldly looked at Casey. "We'll go first. Inform magistrate and let them investigate this matter. Don't let the military abuse their power." The butler understood the meaning of his words and nodded. He stared at Casey with a gloomy expression. Casey glanced at him but didn't care. He followed Mark out of the hall. Although it was an arrest, the carriages that were brought over were all of the highest quality, luxurious, and noble. On the surface, it looked like soldiers were escorting some noble person. "Lisa, I'm leaving. I'll leave his place to you." Sarah came to the front of the carriage and said goodbye to her guard. Although she was more mature than other children of the same age, she had to deal with family affairs at a young age. She was in charge of the life and death of tens of thousands of civilians. But at this moment, her eyes couldn't help but turn red. She bit her lips as she vaguely guessed that the youth was the reason why the consortium encountered such a thing. Although there were many enemies of the Melon Consortium, but the one she suspected the most was the youth. Her intuition told her that her heart was full of guilt and self-blame. If she could kill the youth earlier, then there wouldn't be so many problems. "Miss, I know what to do. Take care of yourself," Lisa said in a respectful tone. She was dressed in a servant's attire. She looked like a handsome knight. However, her chest was bulging out. It was hard to ignore. Sarah held her skirt as she went up the carriage. Her fingers tightly clenched the skirt. The remorse and grievances in her eyes gradually turned into intense hatred. She never thought that one day she would be in such an embarrassing situation. Although the carriage she was sitting in was incomparably exquisite, it wasn't inferior to her private carriage. It was a luxury that ordinary civilians couldn't afford to ride in their entire life. The butler returned to the hall after George, Sarah, Mark, and the others left. He looked at his servant. "Immediately send the news to young Master Melk. Let him ask the bishop to come forward and bail the master." "Yes," the servant replied. "You go and call Mr. Myers and Mr. Malparton. Tell them that there is an important matter to discuss." "Yes." "You go and inform General William. Let him send people to take care of the master. Don't let anyone offend him." "Yes." A series of orders were passed down from the mouth of the butler. The entire Mel Castle was like a huge machine that quickly operated. "Is it done?" Dean asked Crone. Crone gently picked up the letter from the desk and handed it to Dean. "Master, it's done. Please have a look." Dean glanced at it and nodded. "Send it to old Feline." "Yes." Crone put the letter into an envelope and went out to deliver the letter. Dean got up and moved his muscles and bones. After sitting on the bed for a long time, he felt frozen. There seemed to be something wrong with his body. However, with the simple modern medical knowledge he learned from the super chip, he couldn't find the cause. It was estimated that it would be useless to ask other doctors to diagnose him unless he invited some top doctors. However, These doctors had connections with some big forces, and it was easy to leak his physical condition. He could only wait until he learned medical skills and then diagnose by himself. Dean went downstairs and came to the hall. Jake, Sandro, and their children had been sent back to the Rhine Castle. The hall had become empty. It was deserted and quiet. However, Dean has long been accustomed to the silence. He looked up at the distant sky. His eyes flashed as he looked at Nicholas. The rain has stopped. Prepare some pastries and tea. Nicholas was surprised, but didn't say anything. He turned around and ordered the kitchen. Dean sat on the sofa in the hall and quietly read a book. It didn't take long for the sound of hooves to be heard outside the castle. It was a horse galloping along the Tyza River. Reed and the remaining guards quickly stopped him. The latter took out a medal from his bosom and handed it over. Reed checked it and allowed him to enter. "Master, people from the Knights' Hall have come to see you." Nicholas ran over. Dean didn't raise his head. "Let them in." "Yes." After a moment, the youth was led into the hall by Nicotine. He saw Dean sitting on the sofa. There was a trace of awe in his eyes. He stepped forward and saluted. "Greetings, Master. I'm a Silver Knight of the Knights' Hall, Bolt." "Sit down." Dean put away the book and smiled at him. He raised his chin towards Nicholas. Nicholas ordered the servants to bring the pastries and tea. He was curious, as he didn't know how Dudian predicted that someone would come a visit. Bolt sat down gracefully and took out a letter from his pocket. He handed it over with both hands and said respectfully, "Master, I'm here to deliver a letter. Please take a look." Dean nodded and took the letter. He looked at Bolt and smiled. "Thank for the trouble. But please go back and tell them that the civilians in the residential district are in danger due to the barbarians' invasion. The nobles and civilians in the commercial district are also in danger. I'm about to go to the battlefield, so I have no time to accept the title ceremony from the Knights' Hall. I'll personally come to apologize if I survive the war." Bolt's eyes flashed with respect as he said, "I heard that Master disregarded his own safety and personally rushed to the battlefield. Not only did you guard the Scarlet Canyon for 16 hours, but you also killed hundreds of barbarians. You also captured a barbarian royal. It is really admirable. Compared to you, I am ashamed. I am a pure Silver Knight, but I can only stay in the commercial district. I can't go to the battlefield and kill the enemy. It is an insult to the Knight's way." Bolt sighed as he said this. Dean smiled. Justice is also part of the Knight's spirit. Strictly abide by the law and obey orders. It's not necessary to go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Bolt nodded and said, "Grandmaster is right. Since you don't have time to confer titles, I'll go back first." Chapter 398. Nicholas returned to the hall after sending away the young knight. He looked at the letter in Dean's hand, which was engraved with the emblem of the Knights' Hall. There was a trace of envy in his eyes, but also curiosity. He didn't know what kind of knight position the Knights' Hall would grant to Dean. Would he start off as a Silver Knight? Dudian glanced at Nicholas and threw the letter on the table. "Send it to my study room." "Yes." Nicholas's heart trembled slightly, and he respectfully nodded and took the letter upstairs. Although he was curious, he didn't dare to open it. After all, this wasn't something he could do as a butler, and he had already lost the chance to pardon him. "The Knights' Hall really thinks highly of me. I don't think it would be easy for me to get the title of a Golden Knight. I don't know how much of a master's identity is involved in this title. Power is really a good thing." Dudian's mouth curved into a smile. He liked this feeling. Send a letter to other nobles? Old Feline's face slightly changed as he looked at the letter that had just been delivered. Finally, the net has begun to close. I hope that the net is big enough and strong enough so that the big fish won't be fooled a second time. Sander, who was next to him, was startled. "Father, this young master, Master Dean, wants to deal with the Melon Consortium? The time is almost right." Old Feline slowly put away the letter. He opened the oil lamp and threw it into the flame. The letter was quickly engulfed by the flame. Master's identity, and he is stirring up people's grievances against the Melon Consortium. I guess that many families of the Melon Consortium are applying to withdraw. The pillars have been removed, and the castle will eventually collapse. Sanders slightly frowned. "Father, although the melon consortium is gone, but a dying tiger can bite a wolf to death. It won't be so difficult to bite. He asked you to send a letter to other nobles. Does he want to use us as the vanguard? If there is any danger, then he can deal with it. But we won't have a chance. Old Feline was silent for a moment. He shook his head. He won't do that. Sandro couldn't help but look at him when he heard his father's confident words. Anger suddenly surged in his heart as he said in a low voice, "Father, I really don't understand. Why you trust him so much? He used to be a prisoner and a ferocious hunter. You've also seen that he's not as simple as we thought he was. Under the coat of his amazing talent, there's a cold and ruthless heart." Old Feline slowly turned to look at him, just looking at him. Facing his father's gaze, Sandro felt that he couldn't stay silent anymore. He spat out all the words that had been accumulating in his heart for a long time. "Father, I know that he's done a great favor for our Ryan family, but he was just using us. He escaped from prison because he coerced you to bail him out. Although he promised to let our Ryan family return to its heyday, how can you believe only one side of the story? He made new textile machines and matches. He helped our Ryan family to improve our life and improve our economy. But the purpose of this is just to use us. He is just a pariah. If he doesn't have the support of an aristocrat, then the Melon Consortium can throw him back into prison. So he can only support us so that our shelter will become more and more luxuriant. In the end, he has always been using us. I used to think that he was just a talented teenager, but now it seems that he is simply a devil. He is more terrible than we imagined. The Melon Consortium has been in the commercial district for decades. It has experienced many hardships and suffered many blows. However, only took this boy a year to push the Melon Consortium into a desperate situation. It was only a year. Sandro was getting more and more excited. Now he is a master. Even if we don't exist, he has the status of a noble. Countless nobles are willing to be a feather on his wings. Our Ryan family is just a declining noble family. He is such a cold-blooded person. Why would he care about us? To him, we are nothing more than loyal dogs. That's enough. Old Feline shook his head and stopped him from talking. Sandro slightly gritted his teeth as he looked at Old Feline. This was the first time that he looked at his father without fear. Old Feline slowly moved his eyes. From the moment he assassinated Deacon Huey and framed the Milan family, I knew that our family was harboring a devil. I naturally don't believe his words. I also don't believe a person's loyalty to his promises. However, there's one thing that I believe in him. One thing? Sandro was startled. The devil is cruel, greedy, and violent. But he is different. In addition to these things, he has pride. Old Feline slowly said, he is a proud person. Although he may not return the favor to our Ryan family, but at least he won't treat us as pawns. This is trampling on his own self-esteem. Sandro was stunned for a moment before he fell silent. Old Feline turned to look at him. You don't have to be afraid of him. Although he is cold-blooded, but this is the way to survive. Only in this way can he bring down the Melon Consortium. Only in this way can he go to the peak. After all, in the giant wall where we live, there's always something like the pyramid recorded in the book Golden Desert. But the pyramids we live in are built by people. If we don't have the courage to climb up by stepping on others, how can we stand at the top and overlook the world? Sandro slightly bit his lips as he bowed his head. Go and pressure him according to what he said. There are some things that he can't do in person. Old Feline whispered. I know, father. Sandro sighed. Noon. Dudian was eating lunch when Sergei and Gwyneth came back together. However, Dudian didn't recognize them for a few days. They were wearing hunter's armor that was full of holes and scratches from swords and arrows. Fortunately, the armor seemed to have been washed and there were no bloodstains on it. But it wasn't difficult to see how fierce the battle was. In addition, Sergei's hair was also gone. He was shaved bald with 3 stitches on his head and 1 on his face. Gwyneth's situation was better. Her armor was tattered and there was a stitched wound on her neck. Her hair seemed to be a little short, but other than that there was no big problem. But the stitched wound on her neck was a bit shocking. Master! Master! Both of them nodded as they saw Dudian. Dudian glanced at them. So shabby. Didn't the military give you new armor? Hearing this, Sergei's mouth suddenly twitched and said, Young master, you're still talking about it. Those grandsons of the military are really stingy. I'm so F***ed up. We helped them kill the enemy, but in the end, we didn't even say a word when we left. We had to wash ourselves with water, otherwise we would have come back covered in blood. The military doctor who helped us had a look of reluctance on his face. Just thinking about it makes me angry. What kind of thing is he, a military doctor with this kind of quality? Even if he discriminates against me, he should at least have a little bit of love. I really want to crush his head. Gwyneth rarely said 2 words. Not bad. Are you hungry? Come and eat. Remember the faces of the people you don't like. I'll send someone to take you to the military to find them. If you can find them, then I'll help you kill them. What do you think? Dean chuckled. Your voice is quite loud. It seems that you didn't suffer any serious injuries. Are you hungry? Come and eat. If you're not convinced, then it's very easy. Chapter 399. Can you kill soldiers? Sergei raised his eyebrows as he suspiciously looked at Dudian. Dudian smiled. Soldiers are also human beings. Why can't I kill them? Sergei looked at him and snorted. Forget it. When I find those wastes, my anger has already dissipated. But next time I meet such scum, can I kill them directly? Dean smiled. You can pick anyone below the general level. But don't let me do too many things. Sergei and Gwyneth were surprised as they heard Dudian's words. Killing soldiers on the spot wasn't a light crime. But from Dudian's tone, it seemed that he could easily help them get rid of such a crime. All right, Sergei grinned. Then I won't be able to bear it in the future. Dudian nodded. Let's talk about your participation in the war. Sergei and Gwyneth came to the table and sat down. The servants brought the meal. Sergei said while eating, It's even more annoying. Those bastards called us hunters and threw us out of the Golden Wall. If Gwyneth and I didn't cooperate with each other, then we wouldn't have come back alive. As far as I know, all the primary hunters sent by the other consortiums were dead. Only 1 or 2 intermediate hunters were lucky enough to survive. There were 15 senior hunters, including me and Gwyneth. More than half of them were dead or injured. Dudian slowly nodded. Although he had heard about this matter from the informants, but it wasn't so detailed. It seemed that the military had weakened the private forces of the 6 consortiums. However, it was only weakened. Unlike the wealthy merchants of the olden days, as long as one was a noble, he or she had the right to recruit a corresponding number of guards according to the size of his or her territory. This was also the private military force of each noble. It was said that they were there to look after their territory and maintain order in their territory, but in reality, they were used for self-defense and against the military. Because of this, when all the private military forces under the command of the nobles were united, their numbers were so astonishing that the military, the magistrate, and even the Holy Church did not dare to provoke them. Among these private forces, the hunters were undoubtedly the strongest trump card. However, in Dean's view, the hunters were probably a small part of the top private forces of the consortia. After all, the wealth that could be obtained outside the giant wall was not much compared to the wealth that could be obtained inside the giant wall. It was not worth to invest too many troops over there. Moreover, in terms of organization, the hunters were only a vassal organization of private forces. Only those who rented the passage could form a hunter team. But there was also a limit to the number of hunters. Nobles who didn't rent the passage could only form territorial guards and knights. Knights had their own squires, which was one of the main reasons why many nobles loved knights. They could greatly increase the number of their private troops, preventing other nobles from attacking and annexing them. Master, why did you call us back? Gwyneth picked up a piece of steak and put it into her mouth as she asked Dudian. Dean looked at her and nodded. First, I'm afraid that you will die. Second, I need you to stay by my side. I don't trust anyone else. Sergei glanced at Dudian's left hand. Did someone attack you? Yes. Sergei nodded and no longer said anything. He bowed his head and ate. Thump, thump. At this time, the sound of horses' hooves echoed from outside the castle. Dean's eyes slightly moved as he looked up. A wave of scarlet heat rushed over from afar. Gradually, the silhouettes became clearer. It was actually an army. Reed, who was guarding the entrance of the castle, was surprised to see the incoming army. His pupils shrank as he saw the 3 figures in front of the army. The army stopped in front of the castle. Several figures jumped off the horse. "Greetings, General DeLong." General DeLong was the leader of the Mouse's 3 generals. Next to him was General Dushing and General Dagey. As a field officer, he was very clear about the existence of these 3 generals. They weren't just major generals, but they were also the most trusted people of the 5-star General Lorenzo. They were also his personal attendants. They were always by his side to protect his safety. Lorenzo was able to avoid dozens of assassination attempts. Lorenzo was able to live to this day, thanks to the 3 Mouse generals. Well, DeLong looked at his broken arm and smiled. "Yes, Master Dean is at home. We were ordered to protect his safety. The Master is inside. Please come in," Reed said respectfully. DeLong nodded slightly and followed Reed into the castle. As soon as he entered the castle, DeLong was a little surprised. The decorations of the castle were very simple, even crude. It was hard to imagine that a master of magic would live in such an ordinary castle. There were no luxurious decorations at all. The clothes of his servants were also very ordinary. It was like a declining noble family. "Master, these 3 are—" Reed came in front of Dean and introduced them one by one. After the introduction, Dylan said, "Master, we were ordered to protect your safety. We may stay here for a while. I hope you don't mind." Dean was surprised as he looked at the 3 of them. The heat emitted from their bodies was at senior hunter level. They were not inferior to Sergei, who was standing next to them. "Sorry to trouble the 3 generals." Dean politely replied. It seemed that the last assassination attempt on him had scared the military. Sergei and Gwyneth sat at the table and didn't move. They were keenly aware of the unusual, dangerous atmosphere coming from the 3. Military HQ. In a tightly guarded prison, hundreds of soldiers were patrolling outside the prison. The defense was much stronger than Thornflower Prison. Although Thornflower Prison was known as the #1 prison in the outer wall, but it was used to supervise criminal civilians, small nobles, knights, and so on. However, the prison was used to supervise tycoons, business tycoons, high-level magistrates, or even bishops of the Holy Church. Even if the forces behind these people attacked, it would be difficult to invade the prison. After all, this was the headquarters of the military. At this moment, a horse carriage was escorted by 2 groups of soldiers. It arrived in front of the prison. 2 figures came down from the carriage. One was a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes. He had a mustache and was holding a file box in his hand. The other person was dressed in gray clothes made of exquisite fabric, but the color was low-key. He was about 50 years old, and his skin was still smooth, but there were some white hairs on his temples. "Please," a middle-aged officer respectfully said. Both of them followed him to the front of the prison. The officer showed his ID to the guard. The guard looked at it and said, "The general has ordered that you're only allowed to visit for 10 minutes. The officer's face sank. "What are you talking about? Open the door." The guard opened the door. The officer led both of them into the prison. Mel is in the 4th room. The 2 of them followed along the long corridor. This prison was completely different from an ordinary prison. The inside was like a deep and dark castle. It was all built with sturdy boulders. There were no steel bars, windows, or doors made of iron pillars. It was like the basement of an ancient castle. The officer came to the door of the 4th room and showed his ID. The 4 guards took turns to look at him and opened the door. 10 minutes. The officer opened the door and said to both of them, "Please, I won't go in." "Thank you." The middle-aged man in a suit nodded and entered the room. The room was extremely bright. There was a soft red carpet on the floor. There were comfortable sofas around. There were portraits of famous stars and oil paintings of famous artists on the wall. There were bookcases and wine cabinets. There were bright red wine inside. It didn't look like a prison. Chapter 400. Old Patriarch Mel. The middle-aged man in suit hurried forward. George, who was sitting on the sofa, slowly raised his head. His eyes swept over the middle-aged man's body and saw the gray-clothed figure behind him. George's gloomy face couldn't help but reveal a smile. "Thank you, Bishop Paul. I didn't expect you to personally come here. I'm really ashamed to let you witness such a scene. Shall we go back and have a drink?" The man in gray lifted the hood on his head, revealing a face that seemed to radiate brilliance. He shook his head slightly and said, "Old Patriarch, I've made a fool of myself. I'm really sorry." "Sorry?" George was slightly startled. He suddenly felt a trace of unease in his heart. He turned to the middle-aged man in a suit and asked, "Bullet, what's going on?" The middle-aged man's face turned ugly. "I'm sorry, Old Patriarch. We can't bail you and Mr. Kinson, as well as your granddaughter, Miss Sarah, out. We have to trouble you to stay here for a few more days." George couldn't help but be startled. He raised his eyebrows. "Say it again. What do you mean?" Blatter gritted his teeth. "Old Patriarch, we have used all kinds of connections, but the situation is too special. So we can't release you on parole." "Can't be released on parole?" George Mell angrily looked at him. "Bastard, do you mean that I will continue to stay here? Who am I? Do I have to stay here? Are you crazy? Didn't you bring your brain with you when you go out?" Blatter said bitterly, "Old Chief, I've investigated. The main reason why you were in prison this time was because Master Dean captured a savage royal. Under the interrogation of the military headquarters, he confessed your names. Now, the military headquarters has arrested you for rebellion and colluding with foreign enemies. These are all major crimes, and it's a time of war, so the military headquarters has ordered that you cannot be released on bail." George said angrily, "Don't talk to me about sin. This is the military's business. It's your business. I only know that I want to get out now, right now. Old Patriarch." Bishop Parker stepped forward and sighed. "I'm really powerless in this matter. I have used my connections in the Holy Church to guarantee for you. But I don't know where I got the news that your Mell family has a conflict with the two legendary masters. So some people who wanted to help you have withdrawn their hands. I can't do anything by myself. I'm sorry." George's cheeks twitched as he heard his words. He grabbed a bottle of red wine on the table and smashed it on the ground. He angrily said, "Damn bastard. He captured the barbarian royal family. He must be colluding with him. Damn it." He slowly sat back on the sofa. His face was filled with anger as his eyes were gloomy. Blatter said bitterly, "I will investigate this matter immediately, but I hope that the old patriarch can bear with it a little longer. I know that the living conditions here are not good. I will definitely think of a way to get you out as soon as possible." George looked up at him. "Do you understand? I am the patriarch of the Mell family. If I am arrested by the military, it will damage my reputation, the reputation of the Mell family, and the reputation of the entire Mellon consortium. Now you want me to stay here for a few days? Living conditions? This is a prison. Is this a place where I can live? But one day at most." George took a deep breath. His eyes were extremely cold as he said, "I will only give you 1 day. If you can't make the military relent in 1 day, then inform Myers and Melk to negotiate with the military." Bishop Brent and Bishop Payer's faces changed. Bishop Payer quickly said, "Patriarch, you have to think twice. If we start a negotiation now, it will completely anger the military. They will not only arrest you, but also the patriarch of the Scott family, Chastov. So, this matter may not be set up by the Scott family, but the military really has some evidence. Otherwise, they wouldn't dare to arrest you just based on a confession from the barbarian royal family." George stared at him. "What is the Scott consortium going to do? That old bastard Chastov won't sit still and wait for death." Blatter's face turned ugly. He lowered his head and said, I just heard that Mr. Chastov seems to have been bailed out." "What?" George suspected that there was a problem with his ears. He felt as if he had heard a joke. He and I were arrested, but he was bailed out? He can be bailed out, but I have to sit here and wait? Bishop Payer smiled. "Old Patriarch, the Scott Consortium is too shrewd. They used their close relationship with Master Dean to find a lot of people in the Holy Church to help them. The military took the legendary invention of Master Dean for free. They wanted to give face to Master Dean, so they bailed him out. Moreover, old Fooling from a New World consortium said that your Melon consortium had secretly framed Master Dean. George stared at him in bladder. Suddenly, he coughed violently and covered his mouth. Blood spilled from his fingers. Old Patriarch, Bishop Payer, and Bladder rushed to help him. George raised his hand to stop them. He used the back of his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. He took a deep breath and said in a self-deprecating tone, "I didn't expect that I would be defeated by a 16-year-old boy after decades in the commercial district. What a great master! What a genius! Ha ha ha!" He turned to Bishop Payer. "We don't have to wait for a day. Immediately mobilize the troops and negotiate with the military. If they don't agree, then use all the troops and fight with the military. I don't believe that they will dare to be tough now that they can't even protect themselves." Bishop Payer was anxious. "Old Patriarch, we can't. We won't be able to go back if we do this. The damage to the consortium will be too great." George stared at him and said, "If I don't go out now, then the consortium will no longer exist. What is outside is not a sheep, but a bloodthirsty wolf. There is also a group of tigers eyeing us." Bishop Payer was startled. Dean put on the hunter's armor and looked at himself in front of the mirror. He turned and left the room. Behind him, Sergei and Gwyneth, dressed as attendants, followed closely behind. "Master, are you going out?" Crone saw Dean in the hall and hurried to greet him. Dean said, "Prepare the horse and go to the military." "Yes." A moment later, a horse was brought out of the castle. Dean stepped out of the castle and looked around at the hundreds of figures on the grass outside the castle. These were the elite troops sent by the military to protect him. If they were used in the front line during the war, they would play a great role. But at the moment, they had become his personal guards. It showed how much the military was afraid of him. Looking ahead, the dark clouds had already retreated. The blue sky was clear, and the sun shone down on the earth. Dean smiled as he got on the horse. High up in the clear sky, a giant black shadow suddenly swept across the horizon. It wasn't the first time Dean saw it, but he didn't think much about it. He was in a good mood as he looked at Reed. "Colonel, what is that bird?" Reed looked up. "Master, it's not a bird. It's a dragon. It's rare to see a dragon. Generally, you can only see it during the black snow season." "Dragon?" Dean looked at it. "How come we haven't seen a dragon in the outer wall?" Chapter 4:01. Dragon doesn't hurt people. Dean slightly raised his eyebrows as he looked at the black shadow that was flying into the sky. "Are you saying that such a big guy grew up as a vegetarian?" Reed replied, "Master, don't you know that the dragon is the mount of the god of light? It eats the monsters outside the giant wall. It doesn't hurt people." Dean quietly looked at the black giant that turned into a black dot and disappeared into the horizon. He didn't continue to talk with Reed. He felt a trace of unusual feeling in his heart. Compared to the divinity that Reed talked about, the cruel reality and the surrounding made him more inclined to believe in the bestiality. "Let's go," Dean said. Reed didn't think much about it as he issued an order. Everyone set off. Sergei and Gwyneth were at Dean's side. The 3 generals of the Gophers were next to them. There were 300 elite soldiers sent by the military. The murderous temperament of the elite soldiers was completely different from that of ordinary soldiers. It didn't take long for them to attract the attention of the residents on the street. Although the rain had stopped, there was still water on the ground that could wet the shoes. The horses galloped all the way to the northern military region. From Dean's castle to the northern military region, they passed through the main street of the commercial district. Dean was quickly recognized by the people and was followed by cheers and shouts along the way. Dean arrived at the northern military region after more than an hour. He took Sergei, Gwyneth, and the 3 generals of the Gophers to the headquarters of the military region. Lorenzo and several other older generals were in front of the sand table and discussing the military strategy. They had to stop talking after Dean arrived. "Master, are you going to the battlefield again?" Lorenzo knew the purpose of Dean's visit from the messenger's mouth. He felt helpless in his heart. Dean was definitely the most active master he had ever seen. Dean nodded and smiled. "Since the general knows, then I won't delay any longer. I hope that I can go out as a knight. You can give me a staff officer and some troops. I hope that I can personally go to the battlefield and kill the enemy. I won't retreat in the face of danger." Lorenzo felt some pain in his temples. "Master, we all know your intentions. But the battlefield is different from other places. The changes are too dangerous. If there is an accident, then the military won't be able to escape the blame. I hope that you won't embarrass us." Dean shook his head and said in a serious tone, "Since the general is worried that my death will put you in a difficult situation, then I will write this letter as my last words. Everything is voluntary and has nothing to do with the military. Is that okay?" Lorenzo was speechless. He thought that if Dean really died, then what would be the use of writing a letter? How much credibility would it have? If the Dark Church or other forces took the opportunity to guide the public opinion and use this matter to attack, then wouldn't he be unable to defend himself? Lorenzo didn't know whether Dean really didn't understand or deliberately pretended not to understand. But he was more inclined to the latter. After all, the boy was only 16 years old. Although he was proficient in the field of inventions, but after all, he was still a teenager. Life was about experience. The invention could only be regarded as a skill, but it didn't mean that he had rich life experience. Lorenzo pondered for a little. "Master, since you insist, then I will grant your request. But I have only one request. I hope you can agree to it." Dean replied, "There's no harm in saying it. Since Master wants to go to the battlefield, then please obey the arrangement of the military. We pay attention to the whole of the war and not the individual. So I hope that you will cooperate with our deployment and listen to our commands. Don't lead the troops to kill indiscriminately. Is it okay?" Dean looked at Dean in a serious tone. "Of course, no problem. I will obey the deployment of the military. But I hope that the general won't send me to the support department because I am a master. I think I have the ability to kill the enemy on the battlefield." Dean was very straightforward. Lorenzo felt relieved and nodded. "Naturally not. Grandmaster, please come take a look." Dean went up and came to the sand table. Now that the barbarians have occupied the Golden Wall, they are divided into 3 groups. The first group is attacking the boundary wall of the residential area, trying to occupy the residential area. The second group is gathering at the main exit of the commercial district, the Red River. But I suspect that they're only here to contain us. Their real purpose is to occupy the residential area. Lorenzo pointed at the sand table and explained to Dean, "At present, there are people guarding the boundary wall of the residential area. But there is a shortage of manpower. There's a gap in the Forest of Pain outside the boundary wall. From the Forest of Pain, we can take a detour to the commercial district. But because of the dangerous terrain of the Forest of Pain, and your legendary steam rifle is not good in the Forest of Pain, so it must be guarded by elite troops." Lorenzo looked at Dean. "I will dispatch you 2,000 elite troops and a colonel-level staff officer to guard this place. What do you think?" Duddian glanced at the sand table and used his quick reading ability to take in the entire battlefield outside the commercial district. The situation was very obvious. The Forest of Pain was indeed the road to the commercial district, but the terrain was dangerous. It was suitable for guerrilla warfare in the jungle. It was impossible for a large-scale battle to break out. General Lorenzo had sent 2,000 elite soldiers to guard the forest. It could be said that the task was very easy and the safety factor was extremely high. "All right," Dean promised. "I promise to complete the task. Otherwise, I hope the general will punish me according to the military law." Lorenzo was relieved to see Dean agree. It seemed that he was overthinking. After all, Dean was just a teenager. He immediately said, "I hope you won't let me down." Dean nodded. His expression was very serious, but there was a trace of excitement. Lorenzo's face showed a touch of smile as he saw Dean's appearance. In that case, the master should set off immediately. "Yes." Dean responded in a military manner and turned to leave. Several generals looked at each other after Dean left. They smiled and shook their heads. "I have never seen such a troublesome master. I have never seen such a young master. After all, he is too young. Young people are always restless and like to toss and turn. His temperament is good. He isn't like some consortiums who take advantage of the war to make money from refugees. It's good to dispatch him to the forest of pain. We can't control him." The generals shook their heads and smiled. They withdrew their gazes and returned to the previous deduction topic with the flags in their hands. Dean set off from the military headquarters and went to the forest of pain. The horn of the military's counterattack had sounded on the battlefield. The rain had stopped, and the dark clouds had melted. The artillery that was previously restricted by the rain had once again appeared on top of the city wall. The barbarians who were attacking the boundary wall of the residential area tasted the fierce, killing weapon of the military. The defensive position of the city changed from a disadvantage to an advantage. Countless barbarians tried to invade the residential area. The giant frog, who was responsible for attacking the high wall, became a huge target in front of the artillery. They lost all the advantages. Time passed day by day amidst the roar of the war. The barbarians paid a heavy price to attack the residential area. However, they were still unable to take it down. They immediately changed their strategy. They dispersed into small groups and invaded the commercial district from various areas. However, the barbarians were too late. By the time they split their troops into small skirmishes, the military's long-awaited new weapon, the steam rifle, had finally entered the fray. It was the legendary military divine art that had recently spread like wildfire. The appearance of the steam rifle instantly ruined the plan of the barbarians to annihilate the barbarians. Instead, they suffered heavy losses and were forced to retreat step by step. In just 3 days, they were forced to retreat to the broken Golden Wall. The fierce battle continued. At the same time, in the Forest of Pain, Dean led 2,000 elite soldiers and 300 elite soldiers that were sent by the military. They were stationed at the edge of the forest. Every day, they would catch some wild animals and barbecue them to eat and drink. When Dean came to the Forest of Pain, there were several barbarian teams that tried to invade the area. However, they were easily killed by Dean's troops. In fact, he didn't need to stay in the area. The colonel-level staff officer was enough to deal with the barbarians. After all, he had crushed the barbarians in terms of military strength and terrain advantage. It was a complete one-sided massacre. It was a free credit for him to stay in the forest. This was given by the military, and Dean was willing to accept it. Sergei grabbed a roasted rabbit leg and passed it to Dean, who was reading a book. "Master, it's too boring here. There are just some minions. When are we going back? We are wasting time here, and there are many blood mosquitoes at night." Dean took the rabbit's leg and lifted his eyes from a book. He didn't care about the grease and dust on a rabbit's leg. He said while eating, "When we finish eating, we will go back. Let's leave this place to Spear." Chapter 4:02. Dudian obviously wasn't joking with Sergei. After eating the rabbit leg, he called Spear's staff officer. "There weren't any barbarians this morning. I guess they were killed and retreated. I'll leave this place to you. I'll take some people back and see if I'm needed in the front line." Spear looked at Dean in surprise. "Master, how can we do this? We have to stay here." You can do it." Dean patted his shoulder and passed by him. He got on the horse and called Sergei, Gwyneth, and the 3 mole generals. They left the Forest of Pain with 300 elite soldiers. They didn't return to the castle, but went directly to the military headquarters. "Master, are we really going to leave like this?" Sergei carefully looked at Dean. "I'm just saying, don't take it too seriously. If the military blames us, what's there to blame?" Dudian indifferently said, "Did any barbarians cross us and enter the commercial district while we were guarding?" No." Dean patted the horse and accelerated the speed of the march. Although he couldn't get any information or read the newspaper as he was stationed in the Forest of Pain for the past 3 days, but it was obvious that the barbarians had been repelled. After all, the weather had been dry for the past 3 days after the heavy rain. Although the temperature was only 3 or 4 degrees, but it didn't hinder the artillery. In addition to the artillery, he had made a lot of molds for the steam guns. He could mass-produce them and put them into the war. In such an era of cold weapons, the appearance of steam guns was a complete bully. The war was over before it started. Military headquarters. Command. Lorenzo and the general stood in front of the sand table. The hills and lakes on the sand table didn't change much. The only difference was that the area inside the Golden Wall was covered with red flags. Now, there were only a few red flags on the hills in front of the Redtail River. They were the only barbarians that had invaded the area behind the Golden Wall. Immediately send a battalion with 200 steam guns to annihilate them. Lorenzo reached out and pulled out the red flags. He threw them to the side and ordered in an indifferent tone. The adjutant at the side immediately passed down the order. Everyone, it's time to recapture the Golden Wall. Lorenzo looked to the Gray Wall. It used to be their proud territory. Dispatch the cannons on the boundary wall of the residential area. Also send a regiment. I want to hear the news that the Golden Wall has fallen before nightfall. Yes, Commander, with our current manpower, even if we recapture a section of the Golden Wall, we won't be able to defend it. Although the production speed of the steam guns is very fast, but the time is too short. The regular army is bedridden and their physical strength hasn't recovered yet. How about we activate the Golden Wall? Another general said. Lorenzo narrowed his eyes. Activating the Golden Wall is our ultimate means. We don't need to use it for the time being. If we expose all our cards in this war, most of them will be infiltrated by the Holy Church and the Dark Church in the future. We can't easily unsheath the sword or it will rust. I also think so. Moreover, with the destructive power of the steam guns, as long as we capture a section of the Golden Wall, it won't be difficult to capture the rest of the place. All the factories can produce 8,000 steam guns a day. Moreover, the efficiency is gradually increasing. After the Golden Wall is captured, we can get nearly 10,000 steam guns tomorrow. In addition to the previous ones, we can completely recapture the Golden Wall. Another general said. If it doesn't work, then let's send the Fire Warriors. Lorenzo faintly smiled. The Fire Warriors are our last line of defense. They don't need to go on the battlefield. The battle will end here. Previously, when they were trying to snatch the Golden Wall, the damage was too serious. They won't be too stubborn now. After all, compared to the broken Golden Wall, they have occupied the Red Maple Mountains. It is easier to defend and more difficult to attack. The surrounding people were stunned for a moment before they came to a realization. This time the inner wall didn't send reinforcements. I don't know if the barbarians expected this or if there are other reasons. I hope that the inner wall won't come out at this time. Lorenzo whispered in a low voice. They were startled as they looked at each other. They frowned as they felt that the situation was unusual. Dudian asked for a pot of wine from a roadside pub on the way back to the military headquarters. He borrowed the newspaper from the owner. He threw the wine to Sergei as he read the newspaper. He couldn't help but smile. He patted the horse's head and it trotted forward. Dudian went to see Lorenzo after he arrived at the military headquarters. Lorenzo had a headache as he saw the active master, but he had the experience from last time, so he had a way to deal with it. He sent Dudian to follow the siege troops to a battlefield with a greater advantage. The danger was relatively low. Dudian readily agreed without any objection. Young master, why do I feel that the general is fooling us? I read in the newspaper that the most intense battle is at the Golden Wall. Why did he say that the place we are going to is more important? Is it more important than the Golden Wall? Sergei asked curiously as he rode on his horse. Dudian seriously replied, Don't talk nonsense. The general must have his reasons. We are soldiers, so we have to carry out the orders. Sergei strangely looked at Dudian. He thought that Dudian was such an obedient person. How come he didn't know about it before? He turned to look at Gwyneth. Gwyneth winked at him. He was startled for a moment, but suddenly thought of something. He turned around and saw the three gophers. The three gophers were also looking at him. Sergei laughed and threw the wine in his hand. General Dairon, do you want a drink? Dairon smiled. I don't drink when I march. It's a waste of time. He threw the wine back to Sergei. No wonder you are the general, and I'm just a soldier. Sergei laughed as he reached out to catch the wine. He turned his head and took a sip. The smile on his face slowly disappeared. Before sunset, the messenger rode a fast horse, shouting loudly as he galloped through the streets of the commercial district. The Golden Wall has been recaptured. The residents who heard the news were surprised. They looked at each other and then burst into cheers. Some of them were packing their luggage and preparing to migrate to the inner wall area. Since the rain stopped 3 days ago, the newspapers had the news of the victory of the counterattack. In the past 3 days, the situation of the war had been completely reversed. The territory that had been taken away by the military was slowly being taken back. However, no matter how many victories there were, it was not as exciting as the news of the Golden Wall being retaken. The restless hearts of the people in the commercial district and residential district had stabilized after the Golden Wall was recaptured. The military's counterattack didn't stop there. There were news of the victories in different areas. Dudian was stationed in the Forest of Pain, and the barbarians were annihilated. He was sent to other areas to repel the barbarians. Chapter 4:03. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. The Golden Wall that they had seized back had once again become the military's barrier. The defeated barbarians were driven out of the Golden Wall and set up camp in the vast Red Maple Mountains. They didn't want to give up their base so easily. After all, although the Red Maple Mountains belonged to the outer region, it was still within the stronghold. It was rich in resources. Once they left, they would be blocked by the stronghold again and be exiled forever. The military didn't rush to attack the Red Maple Mountains. Instead, they reorganized the soldiers and strengthened the defense of the Golden Wall. At the same time, the post-war inventory was gradually published in the newspapers. The casualties of various regions and the losses caused by the barbarians' invasion were calculated and published in the financial groups and the military newspapers. There were many generals and colonels who had sacrificed their lives in the war. They were published as heroes. Compared to most of the heroes who had died, several commanders and generals who had outstanding performance in the battle were also published and praised. Dean was also one of them. Dean saw that the military didn't pursue immediately. He knew that they were afraid of the barbarians' ambush. After all, the Red Maple Mountains had fallen into the hands of the barbarians. Moreover, the military wanted to wait for the regular army to recover before launching an attack. After all, the longer they dragged, the more steam guns they would be able to produce. The more they would be able to win, and the lower the consumption of soldiers would be. We should go back. Dean called Sergei and Gwyneth to get on the horse. He declined the escort of the 3 generals and the rest of the soldiers as he returned to the castle. The 3 generals didn't continue to insist. In the past few days, they had seen that Dean and Gwyneth were extraordinary. Their strength wasn't inferior to theirs. It would be very difficult to hurt Dean with their protection. Moreover, the war inside the Golden Wall was over. Even if Dean suffered casualties, it wouldn't have much to do with the military. The battle is finally over. I can finally go back and have a good rest. On the horse, Sergei galloped, gulping down the wind as he shouted in the wilderness. Dean faintly smiled. He waited for Sergei to finish shouting. The war has just begun. Do you want to be lazy? Sergei was surprised. Just begun. Previously, it was the war between the military and the barbarians. Now it is our war. Dean said, both of you will be busy after we go back. Sergei woke up. I almost forgot about the damn Melon Consortium. They had sent 2 senior hunters, but none of them died. One of them is a woman. She seems to have black weaver magic marks. The ability of this magic mark is terrible, especially in the aspect of assassination. She had shrunk into the ground during the battle. She was unscathed until the end of the battle. It's simply shameless. Dean couldn't help but think of Glenn's appearance. He smiled. It's good that she didn't die. Hire her to join our consortium. She will be one of us in the future. You want to recruit her? Sergei shook his head. It's not easy to recruit a senior hunter unless she doesn't want to live or the Melon Consortium collapses. Dean smiled but didn't open his mouth. Gwyneth silently looked at Dean. Master, yesterday was a good opportunity. We would have made great achievements if we had led the troops to attack. But you don't seem to be willing to fight for military merits. Why is that? Oh. Dean looked at her with interest. What do you think? Gwyneth slightly frowned. I can't figure it out. That's why I asked young master. Dean smiled. Sometimes you can't act too much. In addition, it's not your own business, so you don't have to work so hard. It's enough if you do it well. If you do it well, then it's perfect. If you try too hard, then it will be a flaw. There was a trace of doubt in Gwyneth's eyes. Think about the problem from interests and results. Dean smiled. He patted the horse and galloped away. Sergei looked at Dean's back and muttered, I knew that he was so honest. He certainly didn't have good intentions. Go. The residents along the street recognized Dean as they returned to the commercial district. They cheered loudly and followed behind the horse's hooves. Dean saw hundreds of people standing on both sides of the road by the time he reached the river. They were holding flowers in their hands. It seemed that they were waiting for something. It seems that they are here to welcome us. Sergei was surprised but excited at the same time. Dean nodded and slowly rode the horse towards them. The people standing at the outermost edge screamed uncontrollably when they saw Dean. In an instant, the previous noise turned into a neat uproar. Everyone gathered towards Dean and others. Some even fell to the ground and were trampled by other excited people. Dudian was riding on the horse. Naturally, he noticed that some women wearing skirts had accidentally fallen into the crowd. He hurriedly glanced at them and then retracted his gaze. There was a gentle smile on his face. Coupled with the handsome knight's armor, he looked like an upright knight of light. Many women on both sides screamed loudly. Countless flowers were thrown to the top of Dudian's head. Some of them fell on the armor, and some fell on the hair. The crowd followed and cheered all the way as Dean rode his horse. Gwyneth was riding behind Dean. She naturally saw the figures who had accidentally fallen. She wanted to say something, but the words were drowned out by the tsunami of cheers. She was silent as she silently looked at the back of the thin youth. It seemed that his back was shining in the sunshine and flowers. On the other side, Sergei grinned. His face was full of smiles. Although he knew that these cheers, applause, and flowers weren't for him, but seeing the people around him cheering so crazily, his heart was still very happy. The road will eventually come to an end. Dean came to the front of the castle. He dismounted and turned to look at the people behind him. He raised his hand and waved. Once again, there was a cheer. He didn't say anything and turned to enter the castle. Crone and Noise quickly came out of the castle. Noise took Dean's horse. Crone looked at Dean. Master, you're finally back. Something terrible has happened in the past few days. Dean looked calm. Tell the people outside to go back. Tell them that I want to rest and quiet. Crone was surprised, but nodded. All right. Chapter 404. Crone quickly stepped forward. Master, Mel family's George, Mark and Sarah Mel were secretly arrested by the military when you left for the expedition. The news only spread in a small range. Later, old Feline got the news and spread it to the noble circle in the commercial district. Mellon Consortium's stock plummeted, and there were problems in all the industrial chains. What happened next? Dean took a sip of coffee and calmly asked. Crone whispered. Mellon Consortium was going to negotiate with the military to release the three of them. But the military didn't agree, so the matter was left unsettled. So they didn't start a war? No, they have a bit of patience. Dean faintly smiled. Are they still in the military? Crone nodded. Yes. The other members of Mellon Consortium saw that they were still in prison, so they withdrew their funds in large quantities. Mellon Consortium is a name only. I heard old Feline say that he spread the news that Mellon Consortium had rebelled and colluded with barbarians to frame you. So the major nobles of Mellon Consortium have withdrawn from Mellon Consortium. Many of them have joined our New World Consortium. Dean nodded. Now the war is over. Let's see how the old dogs will bite back. Crone was surprised to see that there was no surprise on Dean's face. He thought that Dean would be overjoyed, but he didn't expect Dean's reaction to be so dull. He couldn't figure out Dean's thoughts. Master, Mellon Consortium is about to be overthrown. Shouldn't we celebrate? There is nothing to celebrate. Dudian indifferently said, the moment you put the arrow, aim, and shoot, the result has already come out. Moreover, This is just the first step we have to take. There is nothing to be happy about." Crone was startled. He suddenly thought of something and whispered, "Young master, I have arranged for the people you sent to the residential area to stay in the hotel outside. Now the situation is chaotic. I am worried that they will sneak in and harm you." So, Dean was silent for a moment. "Tell Noyce to take them to the commercial district to pick a house to buy. The war has just ended and the prices of properties have fallen. Send a letter to Old Feline and ask him to use the resources of the consortium to buy a lot of properties at low prices. After a few years, the price of houses will rise again." Crone was stunned. Yes. He turned and left. The war had come to an end for the time being. The commercial district and the residential district were in chaos. The barbarian invasion had dealt a devastating blow to the outer edge of the Golden Wall. Even inside the Golden Wall, the residents near the high wall had suffered heavy losses. Houses were destroyed and manors were burnt. Everything needed to be rebuilt. The pain left by the war was engraved on the land. It was also engraved in the tears on everyone's face. It wasn't only the people living on the outer edge of the Golden Wall who suffered losses. The regular soldiers of the military had fallen ill due to the rain. They had to rely on the reserve army and the conscripted, able-bodied men to make up the numbers. Fortunately, the new legendary steam rifle had appeared, so the reserve army and the conscripted, able-bodied men were able to display terrifying lethality. The war that lasted for about 10 days had destroyed countless families. There were countless victims, but at the same time, there were also a large number of beneficiaries. Among them were various financial groups, as well as many rich people who took the opportunity to make money from the war. They raised prices and sold military supplies, causing their assets to explode in just 10 days. Of course, there were also some rich people who lost their family fortunes, went bankrupt, and became ordinary people. On the day when Dean came back, all parties received the news and sent people to send gifts. They wanted to make friends with the young legendary master as soon as possible. At the same time, the staff of the various consortia sent people to interview Dean. However, Dean refused all of them. Dean wrote a letter to inform Patriarch Old Feline to set up a newspaper agency. In the future, all of his interviews would be conducted in his own newspaper. In this way, the sales of the newspaper would be greatly improved. After all, the best way to create a public figure was to rely on the media. Newspaper was the only means of propaganda in this era. Old Feline's ability to handle matters was very fast. In the afternoon, he sent people to register a newspaper agency. He used a high salary to recruit some staff from other non-consortia. The name of the newspaper agency was very simple. It was called New World News. After the establishment of the newspaper agency, Old Feline handed over the temporary management to Sander. He immediately went to attract some printing factories. He wanted to create a sensation in the market when the first copy of New World News would be sold tomorrow. This required contacts and ways. Fortunately, he was a noble and had Dean as a signboard, so it was easy to find people. Sandro led the interviewers to communicate with Dudian and set the time for the interview after dinner. After dinner, Dean sat in the hall. Sandro was next to him. In front of him was a woman who was holding a notebook. She exuded an intellectual beauty. Her two young assistants were next to her. Sydney was both excited and nervous as she saw the legendary figure for the first time. Her palms were sweating as she held the quill pen. There was a professional smile on her face as she looked at Dean. "Master, can we start now?" "Let's start." Dean put down the tea and signaled her to ask freely. Of course, this was an issue that had been discussed a long time ago. Sydney took a deep breath and straightened out her throat. "Master Dean, what is your dream since childhood?" "My dream is to become a master of divinity. I want to use divinity to change people's lives. I want to make poverty and suffering far away from the world." Dean smiled as he spoke. Sydney immediately complimented him. "Master is really different from us ordinary people. Your dream from childhood is so great and extraordinary." Dean corrected her. "People never become great because of the greatness of their dreams. They become great because of the realization of their dreams. Shweli was slightly startled. After thinking for a while, a hint of admiration appeared in her eyes. She said, "Master, you really hit the nail on the head. As far as I know, you were born as a commoner. Your achievements today are inseparable from your talent and hard work. Which do you think is more important, talent or hard work?" Of course, diligence is important. Talent accounts for 30% of success, and 70% depends on diligence. Dean calmly replied. He thought in his heart, "You will know how important talent is when you haven't caught up with the footsteps of others." Sydney nodded. "Master, I've seen many people try very hard, but they still fail. Is it because their talent isn't enough?" Dean replied, "Many people's efforts are just to deceive themselves and show to others. It can only be said that they're trying very hard." Shweli was stunned for a moment. She quickly wrote it down and asked, "Master, according to what you said, gold will always shine, right?" "Yes, as long as it is gold. Unfortunately, most of you are just a stone. You won't shine." Sydney nodded. "Most of us are eager to achieve our dreams like you. We are willing to work hard for it. Do you have any good suggestions?" "Learn to get up early, sleep more. At least there is a possibility that the dream will come true." Shweli covered her mouth and chuckled. "Master, you're so humorous. You've gained both fame and fortune, and you're enjoying endless wealth. How do you view wealth?" "Wealth doesn't make people really happy." Dean replied in a serious tone. "Poor people like to hear rich people say that." Sydney asked, "Master, which one do you think is more important, morality or wealth?" "Without a doubt, of course it is morality." Dean said, "A moral person will be respected and loved from the heart. Even after his death, he will be immortal. But wealth and money will only corrupt people. Unfortunately, most of them were working for rich people." Sydney was in awe as she heard Dean's words. Master is indeed a noble knight. I hope that through today's interview, everyone can learn the spirit of Master and be a kind person. "Thank you for the praise." Dean said, "If we treat people with kindness, then we will be treated with kindness, right? How can we bully you if you aren't kind?" Sydney nodded. "Master, at the beginning of the war, there were rumors that you had colluded with the barbarians. Although it turned out that it was purely a trap set up by the barbarians, but it must have had a great impact on you. What was your mood at that time?" Dean smiled. "There's a saying that a person is not afraid of the shadow. An upright person is not afraid of the slander of others. That's why I didn't pay attention to the rumors and continued my own creation." Unfortunately, how could he ignore the rumors? Shweli's face was full of admiration. She said, "Master, you're really indifferent to fame and fortune. You're indeed the youngest master of magic in history. Thanks to your new magic, we were able to turn the tide in this war. Do you have anything to say?" "It's what I should do," Dean replied. "I'm waiting for your thanks." Sydney said, "Many people think that the outer wall isn't peaceful and the living conditions aren't good. Do you have any good suggestions to appease them?" "It's meaningless to complain. Use your own hands to create and protect your own home." Dean said, "Unfortunately, you can't go to the inner wall, and you can't leave the giant wall. You are finished." Shweli nodded and said, "I believe that everyone will be inspired by your encouragement. After the war, many homes were destroyed and happy families were broken. Do you have anything to say to them?" Dean pondered, "Don't be decadent and don't give up. Each of you is the hope of the world. The people who really built this world are not those extremely extravagant singers, not those scheming politicians, not those treacherous and immoral businessmen, but people who are kind and simple like everyone else. You are the ones who created this world, so don't give up hope. You are the most important people in this world. Where would there be politicians and businessmen if there weren't the cornerstones of the bottom of society?" Sydney's eyes lit up. "Master, do you really think so? Do you think I'm joking?" Dean laughed. Shweli came to her senses and quickly said, No, Master, I was just too emotional. Please forgive me. Oh no, please don't mind me. No, let's continue." Dean said, Chapter 405. Time flew, and the interview gradually came to an end. Master, I heard that you received a title from a knight's hall during the war, but you didn't accept it. Instead, you rushed to the battlefield. Are you not willing to be a knight? Sidney looked at the draft and asked Dudian. The main purpose of the question was to give Dudian more opportunities to express his thoughts. Dudian smiled. It's because I want to be a knight that I chose to rush to the battlefield. As a knight, I have to fulfill my own knightly standards. That's how a real knight should be. Good. Sidney cheered. Her beautiful eyes were sparkling as she said, Master, thanks to your legendary steam gun, we were able to defeat the barbarians and drive them out of the Golden Wall. Will you create new legendary magic in the future? Dudian smiled. I can't guarantee that I will be able to create a new legendary item, but I will continue to do research in this area. I'll talk about the specific results in the future. In addition to the steam rifle's contribution, we also have to thank the soldiers of the military headquarters who fought hard and exchanged their blood and lives for victory and soil. In addition, we also have to thank the consortiums who actively provided the military with facilities and supplies in the rear. It was their selfless contribution that made us unite against the enemy. Unfortunately, the performance of some of the consortiums disappointed me. Sidney knew what Dudian was going to say, but still asked, Master, who are the individual consortiums you are referring to? I can't say the names of the consortiums as I don't want to have a bad influence on them. But I believe that they will know who I'm talking about if they read this report. I just want to advise them not to make such a mistake in the future. Dudian smiled. Sidney nodded. Thank you, Master. Today's interview was very enjoyable. Thank you for your cooperation. I'm sorry to disturb your precious time. It's getting late. Pay attention to your safety on the way back. Dudian smiled. The next day, the sun was shining brightly in the morning. Military HQ in front of the prison. Two teams of knights wearing dark red armors stood neatly on the grass outside the prison. The style of the armor was well known in the commercial district. It was the exclusive style of the Mel family. There was a dark red flower engraved on the chest of the armor. It was delicate and beautiful. It was very beautiful. On both sides of the knight, soldiers in military uniforms surrounded the entire prison. Their faces were cold, and their auras were filled with killing intent. The door of the prison slowly opened. Bladder helped George Mel to come out. Mark and Sarah silently followed behind them. They arrived in front of the stairs. The warm sunlight shone through the eaves. George gently raised his hand to block the sun. He only stayed in the dark for a few days, but he felt that the sun was a bit dazzling. He squinted his eyes and slowly went down the stairs with his cane. Mark silently looked at the carriages and knights waiting in front of him. He already knew what kind of earth-shaking changes had taken place in the outside world. He slowly stepped out after George went down the stairs. He hadn't shaved for a few days. His chin was full of beard stubble. He looked like he had gone through a lot of vicissitudes of life. Sarah bit her lips. Her slender hands tightly clenched her skirt. She knew that the root of all this was her. If she could go back in time, she would rather use her life in exchange. However, her life obviously couldn't get God's mercy. Master, please get in the carriage. Miss, please be careful of the stairs. The carriage of the Mel family slowly left the prison and entered the commercial district. The knights on both sides of the carriage were sitting on tall horses. Their bright red armors were indescribably gorgeous. However, shortly after entering the commercial district, George and the others who were sitting in the carriage heard the sound of cursing coming from outside. The few people who were lost in thought frowned at the same time. What's going on? Sarah's face was cold. Her gloomy mood was suddenly filled with anger. She opened the curtain and looked at the busy street. There were a lot of pedestrians standing on the side of the road. They were pointing at them. From time to time, loud curses could be heard from the back of the crowd. Some of them even called out the name Mel family and attached dirty words to it. Damn lowly people. A trace of anger flashed in Sarah's eyes. She immediately ordered the coachman to stop. She ordered the knight to find the person who was secretly cursing them. But Mark whispered to her, Sarah, don't meddle in this. Sarah's words stopped in her mouth. She turned to look at her father. She saw his depressed face and couldn't help but feel pain in her heart. She wanted to ask, but suddenly thought of something. She clenched her skirt. It's that damn Dean. He must have taken advantage of the time when we weren't here to spread rumors and damage the reputation of the Mel family. George, who was sitting opposite to her, slowly closed his eyes. You have the strength to be angry. Use your brain and think about how to fight back. Anger can't solve the problem. Sarah Mel bit her lips and bowed her head. The carriage passed through the street. Although there were knights on both sides of the carriage, so that the angry civilians didn't dare to be impulsive. But they hid behind the crowd and shouted a few words. The knights couldn't do anything about it. Sarah jumped out of the carriage from the military area to the family castle. She was so angry that her face was red. The curses didn't stop even though she ordered the knights to detour to the remote road. But the family was built in the most prosperous area. There was no lack of harsh words in the curses. She had never heard so many dirty words in her life. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. Her hatred towards Dean had reached an unprecedented level. Master, Mississippi. The butler led the servants to greet them. George got off the carriage and walked into the castle. What happened today? I heard from Bullet yesterday that there was no trouble except for the withdrawal of some shareholders. What happened today? The butler's face turned ugly as he whispered, Master, yesterday the New World Consortium arranged a newspaper to interview Master Dean. Who would have thought that Master Dean would say that he was disappointed with the consortium in the war? The crutches stopped. George Mel stopped as well. The butler's heart was trembling as he looked at him. He had been in the Mel family for many years, but he had never seen George show such an angry expression. He was disappointed? Just because he was disappointed? George's arm, which was holding the crutch, trembled slightly. His originally gloomy expression was completely out of control. He felt that his chest was about to explode. When he was young, he was all-powerful. Although he was old now, who wouldn't be respectful and polite to him? But now, because of the words disappointed of a 16-year-old boy, he was cursed for several streets? What a bully. Sarah's face was full of anger. What do you mean by disappointed with a consortium? Now, that our Mel family has been imprisoned by the military for so many days, even a fool would know that we are the consortium he was referring to. Bastard. Damn bastard. She wanted to curse, but she didn't know what to say. Chapter 406. Master, they are out of prison, Crone respectfully reported. Dean put down the newspaper and smiled. Did anything happen on the road? No, Crone whispered. Old Feline hired some people to insult them along the road, according to your instructions. But they didn't respond. Dean faintly smiled. It's decent to be able to hold back. Master, what should we do next? Crone whispered. It's time to see their performance. Dean indifferently said, I'll write a letter. Ask Noyce to personally deliver it to the temple. I'll give a public lecture about the principles of gas faction in 10 days. I'll accept 8 students. Crone replied, Yes. The second thing is that you inform Old Feline to buy a guard of the Mel family. No matter how much money he has to spend, he has to come to see me. Remember to buy the strongest one. Dudian whispered. In addition, tell the Patriarch that if the Melon Consortium uses a lot of money to pull the other shareholders back to the consortium, then tell them in advance that I want to accept students. If the shareholders insist on going back, then let them go. Don't hold them back. Crone bowed his head. Yes. Skagen was stunned as he read the letter presented by the servant who claimed to be Dean. He put away the letter and ordered people to send the servant away. Then he looked at his student. Immediately inform the temple that Master Dean will give a public lecture about gas faction in 10 days. Moreover, he will select students with potential. This is a master's lecture, so it must be on the headlines of the temple for 3 consecutive issues. The student was surprised as he heard Dean's words. He turned around and ran away in excitement. In the past few days, the temple was talking about the role of the gas faction. There were many speculations about the role of the gas faction. Although there were masters who had come out to explain, but they didn't know much about it. It would be much easier to understand if the creator of the system personally came out to explain. The news spread like wildfire. The journals haven't been published yet, but the consortiums have been informed of the news. The entire commercial district was in a sensation. They immediately sent people to inquire about the specific arrangements of the lecture, as well as Dean's conditions for accepting students and so on. Only the lower-level nobles and ordinary civilians were still immersed in the pain of the destruction of their homes, the death of their relatives and friends, or the loss of their property. Father, the Bethel family, the Kunka family, and the Ram family are willing to return to the consortium. Mark looked a little tired, but the price is 3 times as much as before. Each person wants 8% of the shares. The rest of the families haven't responded yet. Milan family wants 30% of the shares. Rudolph's servants told me that Rudolph is ready to withdraw from the consortium. George was sitting on a big chair with a cane in his hand. His silver hair was like frost. His eyes were sharp as he said in a cold voice, "A group of rebellious people. 3 times is 3 times. Promise them. After we get through this crisis, we will marginalize them. The Milan family and Rudolph are wearing the same pants." Humph. 30% of the shares. How can they say it? Tell the Milan family that the maximum is 20%. The number of shares in our hands can't be less than 51%. Otherwise, the kid doesn't need to do anything. We will be destroyed. Mark frowned. "Father, what should we do if Rudolph withdraws?" "You go and talk to him." George's face was gloomy. His father and I jointly founded the Melon Consortium. How can he withdraw from it? I'm afraid that his father will die in peace if he hears about it. Mark sighed. All right, but Rudolph is stubborn. He deliberately withdrew his investment. I'm afraid that a few words won't change his mind. In my opinion, we have to find a way to deal with the kid first. Otherwise, the pressure on the others will be too great. It will be bad for us. Now is a sensitive period. The kid will be on guard against us. We have to think of another way to deal with him. George said in a cold voice, "Tell Rudolph that if he doesn't withdraw his investment, then the Melon family will be the leader of the Melon Consortium in the future." Mark was startled. He thought for a moment and nodded. Okay. He was about to turn away when a golden feather messenger crow flew in from the window. It was a messenger crow that was specially raised by the temple. It was a rare breed and was considered to be of noble lineage. George was startled. He raised his hand, and the messenger crow landed on his arm. He opened the letter on the crow's leg, shook it open, and read it. His face suddenly changed, and he tore the letter into pieces. Because his action was too big, the crow on his arm flapped its wings and flew out of the window, dropping 2 pale golden feathers. Mark's heart sank. "Father, what's the matter? Damn little bastard." George clenched his fists. His eyes were full of anger. He will hold a public lecture in 10 days. Moreover, he is ready to accept students. Damn bastard. He announced the news at this time. It is obvious that he is giving the opportunity to other nobles to fight over him. This little bastard is too vicious. Mark's face turned gloomy. Most of the architects who had potential in the temple had aristocrats or rich people to rely on. After all, the cost of an architect was enormous. If there was no one to provide financial support, then the efficiency of the research would be extremely low. Now that Dean had announced the news, it was tantamount to throwing out a tempting fruit. Everyone was eager to become the youngest student of a legendary master in history. As a result, these people were bound to wash their relationship with the Melon Consortium and isolate them. We have underestimated him in the past. Mark took a deep breath and clenched his fists. There was a trace of regret in his heart. If he knew that this would happen, then he wouldn't have given such a dangerous person to his daughter. He should have personally eliminated him. There was silence in the room. It was depressing and silent. Only the heavy breathing of both of them could be heard. George's chest went up and down as he gradually restrained his anger. He was about to open his mouth when there was a knock on the door. Anger flashed in his eyes as he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Come in." The door was opened, and the butler came in. There was a middle-aged man in black armor behind him. Mark frowned as he saw the middle-aged man. "Ron, what's the matter?" The middle-aged man named Ron nodded. "Master, Mr. the New World Consortium has sent someone to find me. Huh? George's eyes flashed with a cold light. What did you say? The butler who was next to him was shocked. He subconsciously took 2 steps back as he looked at the middle-aged man. Ron calmly replied, Master, the New World Consortium has sent someone to find me. They gave me a huge sum of money. 500,000 gold coins. They want to bribe me. They want me to betray the Mel family. They want me to go to Master Dean and listen to his instructions. George coldly stared at him, narrowing his eyes. 500,000 gold coins, what a big sum. You've come here to say this. Do you not agree? Yes, I will never betray the Mel family. Ron replied, How can I believe you? George stared at him. Ron looked at him and turned to look at Mark. Mister, you have saved my life. I vow to do my best to defend the Mel family. Do you believe me? Chapter 407. George stared at him and slowly nodded. Since you said so, then I will leave this matter to you. Yes. Mark nodded and looked at Ron. Have you responded to the secret bribe? Ron Cohen shook his head and said, There's no response yet. As soon as I found out about this, I came to report to Master and Mister. Very good. Mark nodded and sneered. This kid used his identity as a master to isolate our Melon Consortium. He wants to bribe our commanders. His purpose is nothing more than a duel with his knights. Oof. Let's go with his plan. You should agree to it first. Ron was startled. Master, do you mean that I will pretend to be bribed and pass the information to you? Yes. Mark said, but you have to act well. Don't let them see through you. I will. Ron nodded. Mark said, All right, you go first. All right. Ron Cohen accepted the order and left. After he left, George slowly opened his mouth and said, Can we trust him? If he has already been bribed, then using this to exchange for our trust, wouldn't it be? Mark slightly shook his head. Father, I don't believe in other people, but he is the one I trust the most in addition to the shadow. Not to mention 500,000 gold coins. Even 5 million gold coins wouldn't be enough. He doesn't care about money. George stared at him. This is a critical moment. We can't afford to lose. We can't afford to make any mistakes. No, I'm sure of it. Mark looked at him seriously. It doesn't matter, even if Father says it doesn't matter. We could try again. I don't believe that we can't win against that kid. George nodded slightly and said, That's good. I want to see what that kid wants him to do. Could it be that he wants to assassinate us? If that's the case, then it's good. Mark said, But this matter reminds us. Besides Ron, I don't know if the other attendants have been bribed. It seems that we have to reorganize them. Yes. George nodded. Master. Crone ran into Dudian's study. Ryan family has sent news that they have bought the Knight Commander of the Mel family. They want to ask you what they want him to do? Dean slowly put down the book. Nothing. Let him come and see me. Tell him that I have something to discuss with him. All right. Crone went out to reply. Sir, they sent me a message to meet Master Dew directly. Ron handed the note to Mark. The note was taken from a piece of bread. It still had the fragrance of the bread on it. Mark looked at it and narrowed his eyes. It seems that he is afraid of being exposed, so he left some evidence. He wants you to go directly to him. He must have something important to discuss with you. But it is also possible that he wants to test your loyalty. He pondered for a moment, then nodded. All right, you go. It is best to kill him if there is a suitable opportunity. Everything will be over in that way. Yes. Ron Cohen's answer was very decisive. Although he knew what the consequences would be if he killed Dean, but he still agreed without hesitation. Mark looked at him and patted his shoulder. But it's the first time he sees you. He will be wary of you. Don't act rashly if the time isn't right. There will be opportunities in the future as long as you gain his trust. Understand? Got it. Langcone lowered his head. All right, go. The meeting time was set for the evening. Dean asked the kitchen to have dinner before the night fell. He let Crone and Nicholas eat first. After dinner, he asked Crone to call Sergei. He threw a stack of gold notes to the burly man. Tonight you are going to the most famous Moulin Rouge to play. Remember that you are not allowed to come back until the money is spent. Sergei was yawning, but his eyes widened as he heard Dean's words. Master, what are you doing? Sympathize with my subordinates. Dean indifferently replied. Sergei felt that the sun had risen from the west. Although it was inconceivable, he quickly picked up the gold notes from the table and stuffed them into his pants. He smiled. In that case, I won't be polite. I guarantee that you will spend it all. Remember to go to the best Moulin Rouge. Dean indifferently said, If you don't have a good time, then I'll destroy your foundation. Sergei felt a chill in his crotch. His legs were slightly clamped. He smiled bitterly. Young master, what do you want to do? Just tell me. I'll cooperate with you. You're making me feel a little uneasy. Go. Dean waved his hand as he was too lazy to say more. Sergei helplessly said, Then I'm really going to play. Crone whispered to Dean after Sergei left. Master, don't you have an appointment with the Knight Commander of the Mel family to discuss things? Don't you trust Sergei? Those who I don't trust are dead. Dean said, Those who are in front of me are trustworthy. Go and prepare to welcome them. Crone was full of doubts, but he still turned and left. The night was getting darker. Ron Cohen disguised himself as an ordinary person and rode an ordinary horse to the front of the ancient castle. Even though his clothes were extremely ordinary, his upright posture and the somber aura he exuded made it hard for others to ignore him. Ron dismounted from the horse and covered his eyes with his hood. He came to the front of the castle. Who is it? Noyce, who was guarding the door, shouted. In fact, he had a guess in his heart when he saw the murderous aura of the man. Full moon, Ron Cohen said the prearranged secret code. Noyce nodded and pushed the door. Please come in. Ron Cohen pulled his hood down a little and ducked in. Ron had often heard rumors about this young genius in the Mel family. It was the first time that he came to the castle. The first impression he had when he entered the hall was that the place was shabby. The lights were dim and the hall was plain. However, his gaze immediately fell on the figure sitting on the sofa in the middle of the hall. Just like the rumors said, he was handsome, tall, and at the same time, just like what the noble ladies said, he was well-mannered and had a refined temperament. However, as a person who had killed countless enemies in the battlefield, he sensitively sensed a deeply hidden aura from this person. It was extremely dark and thick, like a mass of viscous fog. Dean looked at the Knight Commander and smiled. Ron Cohen lifted his hood and said, That's me. Are you Master Dean? Yes. Dean said, It's our first meeting, so I can't trust you. Can I check your body? No one is allowed to carry weapons here. Ron nodded, took out a dagger from his bosom, and said, I only have this weapon. It's for self-defense. With that said, he bent down and put it on the ground. There was a smile on Dean's face. Very good. Knight Ron is very honest and worthy of being a golden knight of the Knight's Hall. However, I'm afraid of death, so I'll have to check again. I hope you don't mind. Ron nodded. It's okay. Dean snapped his fingers. A quiet girl who was waiting next to Ron nodded. She reached out to touch Ron's shoulder to check if there was any place to hide things. Ron frowned as he saw that the girl wasn't dressed like a maid. There was a trace of doubt in his heart, but he didn't say anything. He didn't know anything about the master's daily life. He raised his arm and let the girl touch his chest. Suddenly, puff, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Ron's pupils shrank. He hurriedly shook his arms and used a huge force to hit the girl behind him. However, the girl was as soft as a feather. She moved back like a soft breeze. Ron looked down and saw a small needle piercing his clothes. His face turned ugly as he looked at Dean, who was sitting on the sofa. He covered the place where the needle had pierced. He didn't want the poison to spread to other parts of his body. He gritted his teeth and looked at Dean. Master, why? Dean gently blew on the coffee. Don't you know that your only use is to die here? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.